Great. With that, I'll call the regular meeting of Township Council for Monday, September 23rd to order. Of course, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular, acknowledge our valued relationships with the Katzie, Kwantlen, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. I'm going to move the agenda amended to defer E5 and I1 to October 21st. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Wren. Is there any discussion on the agenda moved as amended? So, seeing no discussion, I'll call the question on.
I just was asking for a moment so I could see in the agenda.
Ms. Bauer, could you read back the amendment, please? Moved as amended.
The motion was to move E5 and I1 to the agenda for October 21st.
Yeah, so the agenda was moved as amended. Councilor Martins.
No, that's all I was asking. I had to find him in my agenda to know what it is I'm voting on. Thank you.
Call the question on A1 as amended. That carries unanimously. Get a motion to adopt the meeting minutes of September 9th, moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Call the question on B1. And that carries with Councillor Richter opposed. First delegation, Hardip Singh, please come forward.
Son, it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you have 5 minutes, if you could introduce yourself to council and go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Hardip Singh. I'm a resident of the Township of Langley. I just want to start my delegation with this video. Some may find this very uncomfortable to listen to, so please be aware of that from the start. Right, the video you just watched and heard is according to current bylaws exempted recreational noise. This level of nuisance and disturbance has plagued us for 3 years, and it is like living next to a construction site. But even they stop construction by a certain time, but this noise carries on non-stop all day. We haven't enjoyed our property for 3 years, which includes having our windows closed in the last 3 summers. We cannot watch a movie in peace with our children or have guests over due to the excessive noise. The duration of the noise has been from a minimum of 4 hours to 11 hours a day. This is not an over-exaggeration. 11 hours on one occasion. I have audio and video evidence to prove this alongside hundreds of hours of other recordings, which nobody in this township is willing to look at or even consider because the noise is apparently exempted. I haven't even shown the video of this noise alongside 4 basketballs being bounced at the same time. Then I've done the excessive shouting and screaming, let alone the videos of criminality where they are deliberately throwing basketballs off other people's houses. But according to your bylaw department, it's open season. It's all exempted. I have the email from bylaw telling me so. The permissible noise level in a residential area is 55 decibels. From my own sound meter recordings, the noise has regularly reached 90 decibels, nearly twice the limit. Imagine hearing that with closed windows echoing through your property. I've actually found a type of recreation which reaches 200 decibels. According to an exemption, I can legally perform this recreation and bylaw cannot enforce it. How absurd does that sound? Imagine that noise outside of your own home and nobody can stop it, including the RCMP, because it's permissible according to bylaw. But bylaw officers seem to think they are arbitrators of what is recreation. That's personal prejudice and discrimination. The law is clear on this, and personal opinions of bylaw officers do not overrule wording of law. Such is the level of disturbance we've experienced, especially this summer, which has been the worst. It has been detrimental to my health, which led to a heart attack early this year from stress. Even my recovery was slow due to noise levels. My wife is losing clumps of her hair from the stress also. To top things off, it has actually torn our family apart. Our 2 young children have moved out over 3 years ago and now live with grandparents because of the constant noise. Let that sink in for a second. Our children now live elsewhere because of this noise. I sleep on a chair at a bus depot to get sleep and avoid the noise, and that's where I've come from today for this delegation. Sleeping at a bus depot now leaves my wife by herself at home 5 days a week with this noise. What kind of relationship is that? I see my children twice a week. We've been forced to leave our homes in the evening to walk in malls to avoid the noise. We are not allowed to enjoy our home anymore, and that is not acceptable. We feel we are being targeted, with neighbours now making random sarcastic comments about how lovely it is to hear children and adults screaming and now enjoying the loud noise and banging that's occurring. This one family, who in a very quiet neighbourhood are the only ones causing such a disturbance. To allow this exemption to exist, this council, allowing one resident more rights to enjoy the property than another. In this case, condoning this splitting apart of families and forcing residents out of the township. This is clear discrimination. For the record, there is already case law on this matter. A judge has already ruled that compliance with local bylaws does not mean that the activity complained of cannot be a nuisance. The judge's further comments state, I must say that I know of no principle of law which stands for the proposition that an activity permitted by bylaw cannot, as a matter of fact, amount to a nuisance. I'm sure the residents of the township will be glad to know that there is a loophole in bylaw where this bylaw exemption can be weaponized to force residents out of their homes, or even be forced out themselves should your neighbours not want you there. With this in mind, I ask the council to remove this recreational noise from the exemption. If I have permissible time, I have a very short video I can play before I finish off, if time permits.
Yeah, you've gone over, but I think it's important to hear from you. So you go ahead and play your video, and that'll be fine.
Okay, thank you. That's the actual noise hitting the fence. You see, it's the equivalent of gunshot noises, but that video noise does not give you justice, so I rest my case.
I do have some questions from council. Councilor Richter.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Singh, for coming and speaking to us. The first video that you showed us, to me it sounded like a dog. Was it, or was it?
Oh no, the dogs are barking at the same time. They just seem to, all the dogs in the neighbourhood seem to react to the noise.
Okay.
This is just a small excerpt of what I actually experienced. The noise levels are here actually quite muted. These are reaching 90 to 95 decibels.
Okay, but in that first video, was it balls hitting the fence that was
I don't know
making
what that is. According to bylaw, who parked on an adjacent street because their ears seem to be acoustically attuned to find out what noise is, said it's allowed. It's recreation.
It's recreational.
I don't know what that is.
And have you had bylaw officers come to your property to
Nobody's come
measure?
to my property. I've had to force one assistant manager of bylaw to come to my property. He was forced because of his attitude. I complained, he turned up. This is the first time in 3 years someone's actually come to my property or actually wanted to look at any evidence. with any criminal investigation or any investigation, you think you come to the person and gather evidence. In this case, no one's come to my property apart from a couple of weeks ago, which is unacceptable. And I can only liken it to, say somebody being assaulted, you've got a video of the assault, and the RCMP don't want to turn up to your property. They're just going to scout around the area, not accept your evidence, and say, yeah, we found nothing wrong.
Okay,
I find it unacceptable.
yeah. How many complaints to bylaws have you made about this?
I made this in 2022 with evidence of the 11 hours this went on for non-stop. And I was told they were going to mediate. No one went to anybody's property. From what I've been told, they did a drive-by, wherever that involves. So stick your head out the window while you're driving by. I don't know what they did. And now then I got an email from bylaw, the actual, the head of bylaw stating, we don't even have the resources to conduct investigations. What they're doing in this position, I don't know if they haven't got the resources. I mean, a mayor, as you'd agree, you've got so many bylaw officers in the leaflets they printed. They haven't got the resources. So let's just send them home.
Thank you for coming and talking to us today about
Thank you.
this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your delegation as well. I appreciate you coming forward, making council aware of it. But I just want to confirm, though, you have had meetings with senior management personally to try to address your concerns?
When you say senior manager, you mean the chief administration officer?
That's correct.
I came in to have that meeting because, as a last resort, I've actually been to the BC Human Rights Commission. I spoke to other investigatory departments, which I've not had any results so far from the meeting I had here with senior management. They're going to be doing inquiries. I've had no interaction, no emails, no confirmation of anything. I'm just sitting with noise. You can see the date on that video was just a couple of weeks ago. It hasn't stopped.
So that meeting, though, was relatively recent, or was it in like
3 weeks ago, was it? 4 weeks ago?
So I think I just want to highlight that for council's information. I think your concerns were submitted to the new administration, and they've met with you personally. So like a meeting with the city manager, I think, is something that was appropriate, and it was done to try to work on your concerns. And I think that the council here today can hear the concern and can continue to be looked into to try to see if there's a solution.
Okay,
But I
can
think
I respond to that?
Of course, yeah. I'm just trying to highlight, though, that you have met with this most senior person that you can meet with.
I have.
Yeah.
But all it's resulted in is bylaw officers, assistant manager turning up to my property, telling me it's exempted. We turned up the other day, we parked on an adjacent street. I don't see why everybody's scared to turn up to my property and just listen to the noise. No, we need to park a street away because their ears are magically acoustically attuned to hear noise and they tell me what it is. And when I ask them, if I indulge in recreational noise, which legally is any activity which is fun or allows you pleasure, and it could be probably the equivalent of an airplane taking off, I'm not allowed to do that. But another person is allowed to do this recreational activity. So I don't understand how bylaw are just sitting there going through the motions, tick boxes. We've been to his house, we've had a conversation after 3 years, we're still not going to do anything about it.
No, I understand for you it's been a significant long period of time, and I understand that the trauma and the negativity that repeated noise can cause, and I think we've seen that here today. As soon as we were made aware of it, however, I think it's been investigated and looked into by the most senior levels of the township. And if there's a policy change that needs to occur around recreational noise, that's something that council can look into for you, given your delegation here today.
Yeah, but with due respect, Mayor, how long is that going to take? Do I have to have another heart attack? Do we need to die from the second heart attack? Does my wife have to go completely bald? When do we move our children back into our property? I'm not divorced.
No, those are all questions that are hard to answer, but I've got other questions from council, so we can come back to that. Councillor Kuntz, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Hearing that, that would drive anybody crazy. So I'm just sorry that this is happening and that there's been no way to sort of resolve it. My question is your neighbors, and have you been able to sort of gather some support from some of the neighbors that would also be hearing this, and just to kind of support your cause?
To be honest, with the comments we're receiving from certain neighbours, they all seem to be in cahoots with each other, to be honest. And when certain people of authority have come and knocked on their doors, they're just like ostriches, they just dig their heads into the ground. Nothing to see here. Yeah, no one sits in the gardens.
Right.
No one has a barbecue. Everyone's locked away, and we're just held hostage in our own home. No one's willing to help us whatsoever, hence why I've approached the council to try and get some help. And for 3 years, I've got no help whatsoever. I've just been brushed to one side because I'm one person
Yeah.
with a complaint. And this is going to happen to somebody else. I know 3 other people who've moved out this township because of similar events like this. So it's driving residents out.
Yeah.
So this kind of stuff going on, it's a warning to other people thinking of moving to this area. You could be forced out of your own home as well. I'm sure council members here, I could organise a shift from 7 o'clock in the morning, which is by law, until 10 o'clock at night. We can take shifts, and I'll do this noise, maybe even louder. By law can't stop it. The RCMP can't stop it. Why? Because it's permissible by an exemption. All the exemptions within this bylaw, which I've studied, are like airplanes taking off, sirens. Yet recreation falls in the same category. How can that be? So I'm left stressed, sleeping at bus depots. That's my life at the moment.
Well, thank you for coming to council, and hopefully we can maybe address it at some point.
Sorry I sound bitter. It's
all
just,
right.
It's been too much.
Yeah.
Right, Councillor Martins?
Thank you, and thank you for coming and sharing that with us and making us aware of this. Constant repetitive noise is akin to torture, so I feel where you're at, and sleep deprivation is horrible. I am heartened to hear that senior management, I believe I heard the CAO, met with you, and that, you know, that it had to come to that, but I'm glad they did. From that meeting, were you given what would be next steps? Is there a follow-up meeting planned? Do you know how you will know what the outcome is? Anything like that?
With all due respect to the Chief Administration Officer, that meeting was just me churning out information and just notes being taken. I've been given nothing at all. Even the Assistant Manager of Bylaw was insulting with his phone call, just saying, do you have anything else to add? And just constantly, down the phone, just mumbling at me. I said, what do you mean, do you have any information? And I've got the head of bylaw telling me, if you dare send any more videos or comment on the situation anymore, we will fail to reply back to you. We're not going to comment on this any further. That's the kind of attitude I get from bylaw. And apparently he was speaking on behalf of the Mayor's office and the Chief Administration Officer. So someone's given him that authority to respond to a member of this township to say, we're not going to address this matter any further. You dare send us any kind of... I've got the email. I've got it in writing. It's disgusting.
Yeah, and I am sorry to hear that. I was hoping there maybe was some sort of a timeline where there's
Nothing.
a period of review and then following up with
There's
you.
nothing.
Okay.
So obviously I made very clear in the Chief Administration Officer, if I need to proceed with legal procedures against the township, I will do to get investigations done, because the way bylaw is handling this is not right. And for them to turn around in writing and say to me they haven't got the resources to do any investigations, send them all home. Why are we wasting our taxpayers' money on a department that can't even do investigations? The first line of investigations is gather evidence. No one's knocked on my door for any evidence. It's disgusting. Sorry, but I'm just angry and disgusted.
I thank you, and you don't have to apologize. You're entitled to your point of view and your feelings, so you don't have to minimize
I
that.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Singh, for coming. I really appreciate it. And I sympathize with you, as all members of council do. I did want to say one bit of evidence that you alleviated on, but that might be helpful for us as well, because every bit. If you could send us or present us with copies of emails you've sent to your strata council, that would be helpful. And any responses so you haven't quite finished, any responses you've seen from your strata council. The reason why I'm saying that, I live in an area where construction begins early and ends late. And I hear banging and all sorts of stuff all day. But if I hear a sound that is unbeknownst, like a firecracker or something going off, I'm on the phone to my neighbors. I said, did you hear that? And they say, yeah, we're watching. Sometimes we go right out onto the street looking to see if there's something really unbeknownst to figure out what it was, whether it's fire guys or like kids, I guess teenagers, I used to do it too, are lighting off those, I call them seal bombs all the time in the corners, smoke going on, bang, bang. And so I phone, so right away, I'm on top of that noise. So if you could give the council or the staff copies of letters or information or correspondence you've given to your neighbors, that I think that's another tool in the tool bag to help us out.
There's no strata. I'm in a single family home.
Well, you don't have any neighbors that live beside you?
They're not willing to help. It's our immediate neighbours that's making the comment. Don't you think it's wonderful to have this amount of screaming and banging going on? You tell me I'm not aware of the secret WhatsApp groups that they're all on.
Mm-hmm. That's all. That's what I do. Anyway, thank you for coming. Anyway,
Thank you.
Councillor Bailey?
First, I have to admire your restraint. I don't think I would be quite as civil as you are. And I think this matter has got to go to first to the head of bylaws, and it can't be allowed to stay. Repeated noise like that, especially when it affects your sleep patterns, obviously from your the way you are right now, is not good for mental health. So I would like to make sure that we have the head of bylaws come and see you and go on to your property and experience this firsthand and see if we can get some action done.
Well, Councilman, to be honest, I've tried to give as much evidence as I can, video evidence. For them to come on our property now, after the horse has bolted, is a bit too late, to be honest. They had an opportunity, and the head has failed me with this email. Saying, I can't comment further, the case is closed, right? The other issue I've got as well, the neighbours are now making indirect threats at me. When I've just gone around and just said, can you please keep the noise down? I'm being shut up, we're not going to stop. We're going to carry on. If you get an issue, we're coming around. The RSMP has actual criminal investigations going on as well. No one's...
Yeah, that can't be allowed to continue on. There's got to be some action taken to
With due respect, Councilman, I'd just like to state, the power's in your hands. You could vote on this and just go through the process of getting this exemption removed, because it's a legal loophole and it's been weaponized. And that's dangerous, because densification is coming to the township. You can see everywhere now. This kind of stuff being permissible, you get 5, 6 residents gathering around, forcing somebody they don't like out of the area. That's not acceptable, and telling me it's all exempted. There's not much the head of bylaw can do when you've got on the records an exemption. I can't even take this matter to court. I'll be $40,000, $50,000 down, all for the judge to turn around and say, sorry, it's exempted.
Yeah, I don't think that's your job, that's ours. So
I've
thanks,
stated that.
thanks for bringing it forward.
Appreciate that.
We'll see if we can get some action going.
Thank you.
Great, so no other questions from council. Thank you for your delegation.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Next delegation is Vic Leech. Great, thanks for coming here today. You got 5 minutes, but if you need a few more minutes, it won't be a problem. But
Well,
please go ahead.
we got our trusty guys coming with us. So, my name is Vic Leech. Thank you for allowing us to have a delegation. We have some of the people that are visually impaired here. Just a second. We're finding our way around. which has been one of the big challenges for people that are visually impaired. I'm with a group called Walker's Caucus, but I'm also looking at a number of things that are going around to see where there's a lot of inconsistencies within towns. So the Township of Langley is not any different from a lot of the other ones when it comes down to inconsistencies for visually impaired. So what we're looking for is we would like to see that there's a definition for curb ramp. I understand that within the township, they are members of the Transportation Association of Canada. So that was one thing. The second one is curb ramp design. The third area that we're looking for is accessible pedestrian signals. The sounds, they have a locator sound, plus they have a crossing sound. And then the locations and positioning of those buttons when they're on the pole. So I just wanted to say that with the population of the Township of Langley at 150,000 in 2024, it indicates that there will be about 450 people who live here with severe vision loss. So that's 20 over 200 or less, or with 20-degree vision or less. There are about 16,800 people in BC in 2024 that are blind. When there are inconsistencies in design and construction at crosswalks near moving motor vehicles, the potential for injury or death increases exponentially. Defining curb ramp, the reason that we wanted to do that in the bylaws is that what it says that it's a smooth, graded transition from the sidewalk to the road. Now, the 2017 Geometric Design Guide for Canadian roads that came out for Transportation of Canada, they said that if you add that in, that would allow a longer distance for the crosswalk, and we're hoping that it would include both curb ramps at either end of a crosswalk, and that it would allow more time for people to walk across and getting across safely, because with more distance, you have more time. The second thing is design and construction each curb ramp to lead directly to the center of the crosswalk. So if there's a crosswalk, the curb ramp leads directly into it. If there's two crosswalks going out from here, then there should be two curb ramps, each going directly into the center of the crosswalk. As we noticed just out in front here of at 203rd and 65th, we have a whole mixture of all these things. So, but two of the corners lead directly into the middle of the intersection. So a blind person is doesn't get the instant recognition to say, oh, I have to go to my left or I have to go to my right. So I'm trying to say is that if we can design that, that would be very helpful. That is also very helpful for a lot of seniors that are using walkers. It's also helpful for them to go in that right direction. When purchasing and installing accessible pedestrian signals with pedestrian buttons, ensure there's both a locator sound and a crossing sound that can be adjusted for the ambient noise, such as construction or a lot of traffic. That is available today. I'm not saying that all of them should be changed, but when we're designing new corners, then include that. Then you increase the safety factor. And the other item that comes up is when installing pedestrian buttons for accessible pedestrian signals, ensure they are placed on the same pole. And that the pole, we found here, these corners here, they're good. They're both facing in towards the streets that are to be crossed. But in many other places that we go to, you'll have one facing in and one facing away from the street, like if we go down to there. So you want consistency. You know, it's like Councillor Bailey was in the fire department. He doesn't want to go into the fire truck and say, oh, this comes from the other department and another one, and they place the tools in a different way at this place. So, oh, I can't find that, and that takes some extra time. So consistency is a real ideal. And then preferably the pole is within 2 meters of the curb ramp, either the bottom or the top, but it's there. We noticed that just out here at this corner of 203rd and 65th, if you look kitty corner across, you have a pole, you have a fence, and just beyond the fence is where the button is, but there's also a 3-foot drop. If you happen to be like a blind person looking for that and you step in the wrong direction, you're going to go down. So these are things that we're trying to do as consistency, and we're trying to reduce injuries going into the hospital. So that's what I came for, and I just wanted you to be aware of that.
Yeah, do you have questions from council? Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Worship, and thank you very much, Mr. Leach, for the delegation. And I know myself and other members of council got the chance to go for a walk with you and everybody else. So glad that our manager of transportation was here and taking notes. We had the opportunity to actually have this conversation. So just wanted to thank you. And we had a really great workshop for council this morning about our transportation and mobility strategy update that we're undergoing. And a lot of mentions of accessibility came up in that conversation. So this is top of mind, but make sure that we all get a copy of everything that you need to send to us, please.
Right.
So appreciate it.
We'll do that.
Councillor Kunst?
Yeah, thank you for coming. I have a question. Maybe it's through to our staff, but maybe you would know. If any member of the Walking Caucus or advocates for people with vision loss are members of our accessibility committee, newly formed. So maybe that's a question. If you can't answer, maybe our staff know the answer to that.
I do not know at this time as to whether you have members that are visually impaired, but I do know that when we look at, I'm on the accessibility for the city of New Westminster.
Okay.
So we will not be looking at transportation areas until probably 2026, 27, because there's 8 different categories. We're working on 2, then they have to be working their way through, then they'll work through another 2, then they will work through, and transportation is not the priority. But the reason that I'm coming is that when you are near moving motor vehicles, we have a huge problem. I did a comparison between Norway and BC. Norway had a population of 5.3 million. BC had 5.1. But when it came down to motor vehicles, they had 3.8 million motor vehicles. We had 3.4. But pedestrians, 340 were injured in Norway. We had 2,200. But when it came to all motor vehicle injuries, Norway had 4,250 and we had 93,000. 21 times as much. And when you get injured with motor vehicles, you're dealing with weight and you're dealing with speed. So that's why we've talked about the hospital's emergency departments closing. That's why we're trying to find ways to reduce that.
Okay. Through your worship to staff, do we know if we have anyone on our?
We can look at that in other business if you
Okay,
want to look at
sure.
it.
Thank you.
That's good, thanks.
Yep. Councillor Bailey, go ahead.
Mr. Leach, good seeing you again. I love your comparison, thanks. The thing that, impressed me the most when I went for the walk with you was how simplistic a lot of your recommendations are. They're not costly, they're not complicated or anything like that. But to understand them, and I can't fully understand them because I have good vision. That walk was was very educational on how little things like the direction, well, all the things you pointed out to me, how important they were, and I think how easy they could be fixed. Now, you guys, you don't like the ramps as they're coming down. You don't like the full sweep ones.
No.
You like the directional ones, right?
Right.
Okay, and yeah, no, fully supportive of what you did. Thank you for that walk and pointing stuff out, because we can't really understand it the same way as people who are visually impaired. Thank you.
Councillor Richter?
Okay.
Councillor Richter has some questions?
Yes, I'd like to echo that and just say how much I learned from going on the walk as well. I mean, even things that, like tree branches that are hanging too low, which if you're visually impaired, you wouldn't notice until you actually ran into them, which is concerning. Yeah. I wondered, has there ever been occasion where someone from Township has reached out to you or your group with regards to road design considerations?
No, one of the things that we find is that people that complain the most are people that drive motor vehicles. And the next step down is that they have a lot of money behind them. And then the next step down is the people that are in bicycles, because they too are starting to get more funding behind them. When you look at pedestrians, there's very few organizations across Canada that have to deal with pedestrians and special interest issues like that. Yet everybody walks. And it's like, you know, we ask people about what is the, I've had to go through, and somebody said to me, when you're following behind a car, when you're driving, what is the perception reaction time? And somebody said, well, it's 2.5 seconds. I went and I looked, and I found out that that only applies. I had to go to ITE and CITE in Canada, which is the Canadian Institute of Transportation Engineers, which you're a member of. Then they sent me down to their head office. Then I went down to, they sent me over to American Association for State Highway and Transportation Officials. What you don't realize is that when we're living in an urban area, it's called decision site distance. And if you want to include 85% of the people, all the drivers, then you have to look at 9.1 seconds for the perception reaction before they hit the brakes. And people say, well, that's stupid. And then I ask them, how many people are going sleep deprived? How many people work 12-hour shifts? How many people are taking medicines? How many people get out there, they're so mad because I'm being held up. They'll do something stupid. It happens to all of us. And so I'm just saying is that pedestrians don't have a chance when you're going against a car.
Yeah, yeah. It
Anyway.
strikes me that there's some very significant projects underway in this township right now, including the new vision for 200th Street, where
Yeah.
there's going to be an additional 100,000 people living along that corridor. The Brookswood, the development of the Brookswood Fernrich area.
Yeah.
It seems to me that the time is right now that we should start talking to groups such as yours, especially your group right now, because you're organized and you know exactly what the issues are from your perspective. So would your group be willing to provide input to us
Sure.
on those things?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Councillor-
thank you for allowing us.
Councillor Martins?
Hi there, Mr. Leech. It's really nice to hear from you all again. You know, I echo the other sentiments. I really appreciated you taking the time to do the blind-led walk and just to understand things better from that perspective, you know, things that we take for granted. One of the items that I noticed out on our walk that we reflected on was, and there seems to be along some stretches of roadway, And I think we were talking about, as it turned out, the two people with you both live within 2 blocks of myself, up in Walnut Grove and North Langley, and I see you both regularly. But along the stretch of 202, there are some bus stops, some benches that tend to there create some blockage and barrier for people that are passing on the sidewalk that aren't set back enough. And I'm not sure if that's, maybe we can bring this up in other business, but I think that's something to look at too, because I completely took it for granted. We were walking along and suddenly there was a pinch point. And I knew I could see to move around the bus bench, and there was nobody standing in front of it at that time. So I can't even imagine when there's a lot of people there waiting for a bus. Things we need to think about. And then the other thing is I know you were talking about like the interface, like if you have somebody coming towards you, and I know there's seniors housing right in that neighborhood, and people in motorized scooters that are coming towards you, and you're on a narrower section of sidewalk, and you can't see them, and they don't have anywhere else because they're taking up the majority of the sidewalk, and then you're forced with stepping potentially into traffic on the street, and it can be very dangerous. So those were my observations. So I hope that maybe that input can go to staff as well in consideration. One thing I did notice, and I can't remember the exact location, it was actually, I was driving, I believe it was along 216th, the stretch that's been finished just south of 88th. And I thought I actually did see the split crosswalks, and there was sort of a raised, and I might be having the wrong stretch here, it's between here and home, but that sort of a yellow material with kind of bumps.
Right.
And I noticed that they were directional placed where the crosswalks were. So I'm hoping that perhaps we're slowly implementing some of these changes in the township. So I was heartened to see that, and there is much to be done. But again, I thank you for the opportunity. This is how we learn, and we can make, good decisions to support people if we understand, how different things impact different people and our neighbors. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson?
Yes, thank you for coming, Mr. Leach, and your group of supporters as well.
My leaders.
I did want to say to you folks today that you brought back a memory that goes back very, very many years ago. My father, who's 95 years old, he's still alive. He lives in Richmond with my mother, who's still alive as well, on their own. My father was a blind bowling coach. He worked with folks that were, he's not a blind himself, he worked with folks for many years. And one day a letter came through that him and his team were going to Atlanta to support and play and participate in the Special Olympics. It was a real accomplishment for him and his team, but it brought back something, and it was always something on his mind about how to make things better for folks that were visually impaired or blind or whatever word you use. It was important, and it's important to me and this council today. I guess my question is, you've got senior staff here, you've got the transportation staff, you've got the engineer. They're here today to listen. You've got some homework for us to do. My question, I'll simply go through. Currently, some of the locations for sidewalks have the curves, but they're facing the wrong direction. You're saying if you can work with staff and we can work with you, that we'll be able to make some glitches to some of these things to make it better for not just you, but for folks with wheelchairs and other things as well. Can you comment to that?
It's really important in the township that when you build it right. To have to go back and make adjustments and changes, that costs a heck of a lot more money. So it's really important that you do it consistently, you do it right. The engineers go out and actually take the blueprints out with them and have a look at that intersection. Is this pole going to be right in the middle of the sidewalk? Can we get the locators within 2 meters of where they should be? And so it's really important for the township to think about what it is you're doing before you actually, everyone's in such a big hurry to get it done, get it done, get it done. And to take that extra few minutes to make sure you're doing it and doing it right from the get-go.
I appreciate those are not falling on deaf ears today. I'll have you know, and council is certainly listening.
And
So
one
thank you.
more point of clarification, it wasn't the Special Olympics. Special Olympics are for mentally handicapped or developmentally delayed, and it's the Paralympics.
Okay, you're right. It was the Paralympics. and yeah. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you. That concludes questions from council. I want to echo most of the comments. Appreciate you coming here today.
Thank you.
And rather than make you wait, I think I'll go to Councillor Kunst right now. If you have a seat, we'll process your delegation right now. Okay, great. Thank you. Rather than make you wait probably a significant period of time. Councillor Kunst, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I would just like
You can
to-
go ahead and sit down. It's council's going to debate your delegation now. Great. Thank you very much for coming. Go
I'd
ahead,
just like
Councillor
to-
Kunst.
Sure, thank you. I'll just like to make a motion that we have someone from the visually impaired community on our accessibility committee.
Well, before we take that motion, we confirm that that's not already
Right.
happening. Mr. Cooner, do you know?
Your Worship, it's my understanding that there is someone that's visually impaired, a staff member that's on the Accessibility Committee currently.
So you can certainly consider to add more, or we could refer the delegation for a report from suggestions on staff on how to do better.
Okay, yeah, and maybe just as it's just on our radar that, you know, some of these issues get,
But I'll let you make your motion if you want to go ahead.
well, if we know that there's already someone on there, then I don't think that I really need to make the motion.
You
What
want to
do you think?
refer the delegation for
Sure.
a report from staff on suggestions on how to proceed.
That sounds good.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Do you want to speak to it any further, Councillor Kunst?
No,
Oh, great. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I think it's covered off by the referral, but it would just be that in the next round of engagement on the transportation mobility strategy, our staff reach out directly to Mr. Leach and his group to be included as a stakeholder group in that discussion.
Mr. Cooner, you can take that under advisement, I think.
Your Worship, we can include that in the report to council in our suggestions.
Process to consult on things like 200 Street 2040. Yeah. Councillor Richter?
I just wanted to get a clarification. So do we have a member of the public who is on the accessibility committee who has a visual impairment of some sort?
Your Worship, to Councillor Richter, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no other discussion, call the question on that referral. And that carries unanimously, so that Mr. Leach, your delegation has been referred to staff for some follow-ups. Great, thank you very much again for coming. We have a presentation from staff on the 216th Street corridor.
Good afternoon, Your Worship. My name is Yang Li, Junior Transportation Engineer with the Township, overseeing 216th Street Complete Street Project. Today, I'm pleased to have Robbie Lu, Transportation Engineer from Urban System. Urban System is the professional engineering consulting firm that successfully completed 216th Street corridor study in 2019 and 2021. Early this year, Urban System was retained by the Township to undertake on the detailed design work of this project. Today, Robbie will be providing us updates on the project progress and also walk us through some of the key design features. At the end of the presentation, we'll be happy to address any questions.
So it's great to meet you. You and I haven't met, so it's great to see you.
Yeah.
You can stand back from the microphone.
Okay.
It'll pick you up, and we won't get that explosive sound. So yeah, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, at the end of the presentation, we'll be happy to address any questions you may have.
Great.
And with that, I will hand it over to Robbie.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. Thanks, Yang, for the introduction, but I'm Robbie Liu from Urban Systems, the consultant retained on this project that we're presenting on today, the 216th Street corridor improvements. So we'll go through a bit of an agenda here. Sorry, I just want to make sure that we stay on time for everyone. So we have a bit of agenda here today. We're just going to go through a bit of a project overview, highlight some of the complete street design elements, as well as touch on some of the work that's been done previously, which includes a parking study, some engagement pieces, as well as our response to those engagement pieces, as well as the results of some of those studies. We'll quickly touch on some of the costs and next steps, as well as, like Yang mentioned, we'll have some time at the end for some questions. Just in terms of summarizing what we're doing here today, this is all based on the previous council report that was submitted to council on July 15th, so no new information here, but we just wanted to represent it and add a little bit of an update and some context. So for those who may not be as familiar with the project, what we're looking at is the 216th Street corridor, and I know there's no presentation behind me here, but for those that can see the presentation, the north arrow is up here. The area that we're looking at is 216th between 88 Ave and 96 Ave, as well as the intersection itself up 216th and 96 Ave. It should be noted that this street, particularly 216th Street, through this section of the corridor, is designated as part of TransLink's major road network, as well as a designated truck route within the township. So to touch on a bit of a project timeline and essentially what has brought us to today, we have previously done about 3 phases for this project. So the first phase happened round 1, fall of 2019 to about summer of 2020. And it should be noted that this was before the construction of the 216th Street interchange. So what we did is we did some engagement. We went out to the public and essentially asked the public what they envisioned for this corridor, what they wanted to see, what their concerns were. As part of that, we also did a number of technical analysis in terms of looking at some of the parking, look at some of the safety concerns in terms of collision data from ICBC and concerns from the public. Round 2 followed that in the fall of 2020, following into the summer of 2021, where essentially we took all of that feedback from the public and used it to develop a number of options that we thought would best fit the budget of the township, as well as meet a bunch of the concerns that were brought up from the public. As part of that phase, what was done is that those options were brought again to the public and essentially looking for feedback, and ultimately what we did is we came out of that phase of engagement with a preferred design. What we've done here in phase 3, which is where we are currently, this is running from about the spring of this year kind of into the fall of this and winter of this year as well, is what we've done is first of all, we've taken that preferred option from phase 2, taken it back out to the public, and refreshed everyone's mind on it and to see if the concerns that were originally brought up are the same ones that are still relevant today. But we've also taken it out to see if there are any further optimizations to be made as we continue to work on this design. So just in case it's been a little while since a lot of people have seen this, and to refresh everyone's memory, essentially the preferred design that came out of that phase 2 of the project was to put protected bike lanes on each side, the east and the west side of 216th Street for the section of the corridor between 88 Ave and 96 Ave. All of this is done with AAA in mind, which is essentially the gold standard for active transportation facilities. AAA stands for all ages and abilities, which fundamentally means that anyone of any age or ability, whether they are hearing impaired, whether they are young, old, everyone should be able to use these facilities in this corridor comfortably. That's the design objective. The other piece of this project is it's being viewed through a lens of a complete street approach. So again, this project aims to improve the safety and livability of the 216th Street by meeting a lot of these objectives here, reducing motor vehicle speeds, expanding active transportation opportunities, creating new pedestrian opportunities and improving those that already exist, providing some permanent on-street parking as a priority, as well as improving the 96th Ave intersection itself. And really all of this revolves around balancing the needs for people as well as goods movement through this corridor. So without going into too much technical detail for the corridor itself, we just wanted to highlight a couple of the key design elements for council and your worship today. So what we're gonna do is we'll kind of start at the south end here near 88th Ave intersection, where a couple of the key design elements that we'd like to highlight are the removal of the southbound right turn, channelized right turn that exists at 88 Ave. Primarily, this is being removed for the prioritization of pedestrians and cyclists. This really is a kind of a safety improvement and it shortens the crossing distances across 88th and 96, which in general, this intersection is quite large. But in balancing the goods movement as well as this being a designated truck route, we're obviously making sure that the design also accommodates those larger vehicles that we expect to sometimes move through this intersection. In addition to the removal of that right turn lane, we're also improving and making sure that there's connectivity to some of the existing infrastructure that exists south of 88th. That's a multi-use pathway on both sides of 216th, which exists today, as well as, like I said, the main feature of this project, which is putting AAA cycling facilities on each side of 216th Street. Moving further north within the project corridor, we're looking at the 91 Ave intersection here adjacent to Topham Elementary, as well as Topham Park is just north of this segment being shown here. So the main thing to highlight here is the improvement of the current pedestrian signal with a fully signalized intersection at this location. We're also proposing some widening on the east side of 216th, just north of 91 Ave. This includes new boulevard space, new sidewalks, all brought up to the golden standard for those types of facilities, as well as, again, to highlight the implementation of those AAA cycling facilities on both sides of 216th Street, as well as some repainting and some reallocation of existing road space on that west leg, leaving 91 Ave onto 216th to formalize some of those turn lanes, specifically creating a left turn lane. It should be mentioned that there is the possibility, and this is being considered in the design, for an eventual east leg being added to this intersection. There's no particular timeline on that. It's dependent on potential future development, but just keeping in mind that that is potentially in the future as well. So to touch on some of the work that's been done previously, we have done 2 parking studies specifically related to this project and to look at the 216th Street corridor. So those were both conducted in the spring of this year. Really the main thing we wanted to do was establish a baseline condition for the parking conditions throughout the corridor, as well as take a look at what potential impacts could have of implementing the design that we're proposing here. So for those that don't know, just a bit of a history lesson on this corridor here. Prior to the installation of the 216th Street interchange at the south end of this corridor, this 216th Street through this segment was originally slated for 4 travel lanes, 2 in each direction. It was found post-implementation of the interchange that those travel lanes were not necessarily required, so it was kept as 1 travel lane in each direction, and temporary on-street parking was signed on both sides of 216th Street through this section of the corridor. So what we're doing as part of this project is really, since the additional travel lanes through this corridor were found to be not required for maintaining a good level of service through this corridor, those lanes are now being reallocated to assist in the implementation for these extra cycling facilities through the corridor. As part of this parking study, we did do an AM and a weekday and a weekend look at the corridor. Obviously, we wanted to look at the highest utilization time. So during the weekday, we looked at the evening when everyone is expected to be home around 10 p.m. And on the weekend, we looked about midday around 3 p.m. on the weekend, again, to capture that peak. Our proposed design retains about 109 parking spaces throughout the corridor using an expected vehicle length, and the adjacent side streets are expected to provide an additional 434 spots throughout this corridor. That's not including any of the private residences that are adjacent to the corridor. That's only taking into consideration the connecting public roads that are under the jurisdiction for the township. So to summarize some of the findings of those studies, overall, the project area between 88th and 96 are expected to be around a 40% utilization rate. 216th itself is expected to be quite highly utilized on the street itself. The segment between 88th and 90th is expected to be a very high utilized section of the corridor. As part of this study, what we did is we provided recommendations to, again, look at this corridor as a whole, but again, the section between 88th and 90th for additional optimization and potential to provide more of that on-street parking, just given that the corridor is expected to be at quite a high utilization, especially in that weekday evening time period. Again, moving through some of the work that was previously done, again, we did do an additional round of engagement for this project. A couple of the things that were done for that engagement is there was a project website put up on the township. We also put out an online survey that had over 642 respondents. The majority of those respondents were supportive of the corridor improvements. You can see on the slide here, ranging from 49 to 57%, with the minority of people, 21 to about 34% of respondents, being unsupportive of the project. As part of that survey, we also touched on the intersection improvements at 96 Ave itself, with 81% of the respondents being in support of those improvements. We also hosted an open house in June of this year with over 150 attendees. About 57% of attendees who chose to respond to the survey that was given at that open house. 57% of attendees were in support, with 42% being unsupportive. Overall, the main concerns that we heard from the public, both through the online survey as well as the open house that was conducted, was again related to the parking, which is another reason why that parking study was proactively done. And touching on a couple of the other things that were done, again, to involve the community, was a key stakeholder morning was hosted, where a presentation similar to this one was given to those key stakeholders. Included in that meeting, but not limited to, was the school district, the Fraser Health Authority, ICBC, the Township Fire Department, BCTA, the RCMP, as well as the PAC from the Topham Elementary School, as well as the Ministry of Transportation and TransLink. A quick note is that we did also receive a letter of support from Hub Cycling from the Township, which was another thing that was included in the eventual engagement report that was submitted to council previously. I've already touched on the open house, but again, here to reiterate the takeaways from the open house. Again, most of the comments and commentary and concern that we heard from the public was, again, related to the availability of that on-street parking and some of that reduction that was occurring as part of this design. So all this wraps together in terms of our response to all of that input, the response and the recommendations that came out of the parking report, as well as the feedback that we heard both through the online engagement as well as the open house that we hosted. So a big takeaway was, again, the availability of on-street parking within the corridor. So what we did is we took another look at the design, and we looked for opportunities to optimize the design, and again, really put as much on-street parking available as possible. And ultimately, 3 segments were identified for this parking optimization, which was, again, that priority segment of the corridor between 88th and 90th, as well as in front of Topham Elementary, fronting the park, and then northbound approaching 96th Avenue as well. Overall, the summary is that we increased the parking availability on street by about 14% as part of this process, adding about 15 parking spaces, which equates to 124 spaces being available throughout the corridor in our proposed design. This differs slightly from the numbers that were previously reported to council, just through further design optimization and refinement of the design in terms of including certain safety measures and design elements that weren't previously included in some of the earlier versions of the design, in which some of those numbers were pulled from. I will quickly touch on some of the costs. All of this information is, again, just reiterating the information that has previously been submitted to council. So there are some engineering estimates that were submitted to council for the 2 independent pieces of the project, the corridor improvements itself, as well as the improvements for 96 Ave intersection. So the total costs overall are about $6.97 million for the corridor street improvements and $2.42 million for the intersection improvements at 96th Avenue. Each of these segments of the project has an accompanying land acquisition allotment, as well as some construction services, and there is some corridor resurfacing budget allocated for the corridor, This was included in part of the township's maintenance contract before, but just given the consistency and the corridor improvements happening at the same timing as the proposed corridor resurfacing, it made sense to combine these two projects. It should be noted that these costs are going to be updated as we further refine the design, as well as some funding streams have been identified for this project. Just to touch on them briefly, there are some various DCC plots that have been identified that are eligible for this project, as well as TransLink's funding for these types of active transportation projects. So to quickly touch on next steps and really where the project is moving from here, what we're looking to do is to complete the design for the 96th Avenue intersection improvements this year, probably through the winter, as well as do some of the 96th Avenue intersection pre-works heading into next year. The 96th Avenue intersection improvements tender and construction is currently scheduled for 2026, with the corridor improvements themselves being dependent on some, again, council funding and approvals and some further design refinement. Should be noted that the funding for the intersection, as well as the design and the construction work, as well as some of the pre-works, has already been approved by council. So that wraps up the formal portions of my presentation. I'll open the floor for any questions that council may have.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. I might have some at the end, but we'll let council go first. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to commend the team. It seems like the public engagement on this one was pretty extensive, so it's great to hear, and great to hear there's a good turnout. Can you sort of touch on briefly that 40% utilization of the parking? Is that meaning that at any one time, 40% of the stalls are occupied? Is that what that signalizes?
Yeah, so the 40% represents our best estimate of peak time usage. So at any time throughout a 24-hour period, and again, best practice is typically to look at the evening hours during the week, typically a Tuesday to a Thursday at about 10 p.m., again, when you expect everyone to be home. Anytime during that window, we would expect the utilization to be no higher than 40%.
Oh, okay. So, and that's accounting for the new reduced number of parking stalls, correct? 125? Okay, thank you. And then just one last question. You kind of brought it up at the near the end there. I thought that TransLink had announced that they were withdrawing most funding to municipalities heading forwards because of their financial troubles for sort of municipal-oriented projects. Is that the case still?
That hasn't actually been determined yet. There are some funding programs that will remain in place for 2025.
Okay.
And they have not decided yet beyond 2025. It's work that they're doing right now in terms of their next fiscal plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just want to confirm what you're touching on is that as of right now, Mayor's Council and TransLink have notified us that if there's not some solution from the provincial government, that MRN funding will be one of the first items that is cut. Councillor Kunst?
I think it actually relates to that question. What kind of funding are we talking about with DCCs and with TransLink?
So I don't know if township staff wants to comment. In general, there's typically a number of pots that are allocated specifically to active transportation projects. I know the DCC funding for the township is a little bit more specific than just active transportation. It pertains to typically specific components of the project, whereas TransLink is more of a blanket funding for the style of project. But those particular buckets are kind of to be determined and require a little bit more investment in terms of finding out what's eligible and what's not.
Yeah, I could build on that a little bit. There are DCC projects for the intersection at 96th Avenue, also the intersection at 91, and the uncompleted properties on the east side. So those three projects substantially fund the works except for the land acquisition. Land was not included as part of those. Then we have a miscellaneous program where we do roads fronting schools and parks, so we can tap into that. And there's another miscellaneous program for cycling facilities. So at the end, there will be some requirement for township general revenue funds, but probably 80 to 90% of it would be through DCCs.
Great, thank you very much.
And just to touch on that again, Mr. Cordero, the TransLink item that's come up a couple times that has multiple competing projects that would be eligible for that funding. So just because that's an option doesn't mean there wouldn't be another project that has a higher priority to consume that funding. Just to highlight that.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. That's correct.
So-
We are actually planning to apply for other projects, not this corridor at this point for 2025.
I believe it's still the Fraser Highway has been the focus so far. I believe that's correct for the last couple of years and the next couple of years. Is that right?
That's correct. That we're applying for Fraser Highway, and we're also looking at 86th Avenue, which was a priority that council had identified earlier.
So it's something to highlight that it's an option that would come at the expense of another project potentially for council to consider.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It's eligible for funding, but again, it competes with other projects within the township itself.
Councillor Van Popten?
Thank you. What class are the cost estimates? Like how, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so those currently the cost estimates that were submitted previously to council were Class D.
Class D, okay.
They were done kind of transitioning into the phase of detailed design, so there is some level of refinement further that needs to occur. However, typically there is a bucket of contingency or a bit of a percentage that's applied to those estimates to ensure that you're covering some of the unknowns. And so those estimates do carry the appropriate amount of contingency.
Yeah, which is correct if we know the timeline that we're trying to hit. I'm wondering about how much of that contingency will get eaten up by just general cost escalations in construction, depending on how long we take this to do.
Through your worship, that's a difficult question to answer. We see cost escalations in every project that the township is undertaking. So obviously, given it's a 2024 estimate, if it doesn't go to construction until 2026, the actual cost could be higher than what the estimate is.
Yeah, because all of the escalations will use up the contingency that's been set aside. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Richter?
Yes, I was just wondering, given the presentation, the delegation that we had earlier today from the visually impaired caucus, if as you're checking back to make sure that what was good in 2021 is still good today, I wonder if they could be included specifically in your outreach. Because they have points of view that I think are very valid. And if we're going to spend this kind of money on updating that piece of road, we should have their input on it.
Yeah, thank you for that, through your worship. I did notice a couple of items on the concepts that were presented that could be refined based on some of the feedback we got from the earlier delegation. I think that's something Robbie and I will connect with that group. I did get their contact information and we'll follow up with them on that.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, speaking to some of the residents in there, they're concerned about the trucks and especially when they come north of Topham, it's downhill to 96. Are there going to be indicators of light change in all three directions as you're coming down like this? You know, the yellow flashing lights that you're about to change, and other measures like that would ensure that the trucks, I live just south of 16th Avenue, and watching how many trucks go through red lights there, I understand what these people are concerned about. So are there going to be any kind of extra precautions taken to ensure that trucks aren't running them late?
Normally, the advanced flashing lights are done on higher speed roads with posted speed limits, or if there's restrictions in sight distance. We haven't done any work yet, any detailed work on the electrical design, but in terms of trying to mitigate some of the speeds, I think we might have a slide that shows a bit of a curvature in the road that we think may actually slow down some of the vehicle traffic as well. I don't know, Robbie, if we can call up one of those. Okay. Yeah, so Robbie had discussed optimization and adding some parking stalls. And in order to do that, there was space that was in the median that could be reallocated. So what you see here is going in the southbound direction. Just leave it at, just leave it like that.
There you go.
As you can see here, there's almost like a bit of a chicane that's been constructed. And so you'll also have a curb on both sides of the vehicle as you're traveling down the road. So we think with the narrower travel lane, it's going to be about 3.5 meters. And also with the curvature in the road, that should have an effect on vehicle speeds. So that's sort of the approach we were taking. And this occurs in a couple of locations.
Okay, thanks.
I can add a little bit of detail. Thanks, Councillor, for your comment and question there. Just in terms of the advanced warning flashes, there is typically a procedure that goes through. You do a number of checks to see if the advanced warning flashes are warranted. They're not warranted on this corridor. However, based on our conversations with members of the public, the crux of the problem through the corridor is that these vehicles are traveling too quickly for the corridor itself. And so some of the things that were implemented here, specifically some of the narrowing and dieting that is being implemented, is expected to slow those vehicles down and have them be traveling at a more appropriate speed for them to be able to stop at those lights.
Councillor Martins?
Thank you, and thank you very much for the presentation. I really appreciate it. I have a question, and I know Councillor Pratt had already asked it, and I apologize if I'm making you repeat yourself. With regards to the parking, currently I know there is a signage along that route saying future traffic lane, and you said there's 258 temporary parking spaces between 88th and 96th, and now we're looking at 109, but you've increased it to 124, right? So, and then when I heard you say that 40% of the current spaces are utilized, so that's 40% of the 258?
No, so that 40% refers to the general area utilization between 88th and 96 once the proposed design has been implemented. It should be noted that that 40% utilization includes connecting streets, so not on 216th Street itself. The expectation is that 216th Street is fairly highly utilized when this project is implemented. However, given the parking study and the results of that study, it's been determined that the connecting streets, 91 included, and everything between 88th and 96 has availability to accommodate that additional need for that parking.
Okay, so when you were saying 258, then you were also including the side streets?
258 is currently the supply along 216th itself.
Yeah.
That will be reduced down to the 120 or so that was stated in the presentation. I believe there was a number in the presentation. I think it's 450 or so. That is the volume or the availability on the connecting streets itself.
Okay, so
Yeah.
higher than that. I know that that is one of the concerns raised by residents there is availability for parking. I do recognize that there has been signage there for years as well, so it's not a surprise. But I'm just wondering, the parking that you're able to carve out after the project is done, is it relatively in the same areas where the current parking spots are? Because I'm just thinking like 8 blocks is a long stretch. So, you know, if we're now saying the available parking is 4 or 6 blocks down the road, that's a long way away. I'm just wondering, is it still sort of reflective of where the current spaces are?
So I can comment a little bit on the parking distribution. So like you mentioned today, like essentially today there's parking available both sides of the street for the entire corridor between 88th and 96. The majority of proposed parking as part of the design is on the east side of 216th Street. Again, there's been a concerted effort to provide some parking again on the west side, most notably in front of Topham Elementary School as well as in front of the park. It's to be determined exactly how that is to be signed, but again, there's some thought that that can potentially be signed for certain time periods for pickup and drop off or short-term parking. In terms of the distribution throughout the corridor itself, there is a lower percentage of availability being proposed between 88th and 91. We have increased the availability, again, as part of that optimization exercise between 90th and 91st, but between 88th and 90, there is currently no on-street parking being provided.
Okay. All right, because like I said, I do recognize that is one of the concerns, and when we're limiting one side, how do people get across the street, right? And that concerns me as well. And you're gonna have, and it's a truck route, and you have people playing Frogger potentially with trucks. So I don't know if you have any way to sort of help me with that one, because I did read a lot of the input from people, and that seemed to be a common theme.
Yeah, it certainly reflects what we've heard from the public as well.
Yeah.
In terms of the thought process behind the project and how exactly we expect that flow of people to occur, like that's part of the reason, and it wasn't necessarily highlighted in this presentation itself, but there are a number of crossings that are being either formalized or new ones that are being implemented to allow those opportunities for people to cross the street if they happen to be parking on the opposite side of their destination. And so that's essentially how that's been addressed.
No, that's great. I appreciate you clarifying that. Thank you.
Councilor Ferguson?
Oh, yeah, thank you for coming, staff. And, for the housekeeping, what was your name from Urban Systems?
Robbie Liu.
Okay, Robbie Liu, L-O-O?
L-E-W.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Liu. My question now is, it's the title on our presentation, 216th Street Corridor. I actually get a lot of questions and concern from people driving on 96th and 216th. And I'm sure, Mr. Cordero, you're familiar. It's a kind of a jigsaw to turn right on 96 to go back to left, quick left to go back to 216th. Is there any thoughts or process for improving that intersection, if I may?
Yep. Thank you, Your Worship, Councillor. This is the concept for 96th Avenue at 216th Street.
Mm-hmm.
The north leg is actually at the top of the page in this drawing. And the concept is to realign the existing north leg to connect to the existing T intersection to the west. This does require some land acquisition, and the property on the north side is within the ALR as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a water course that has to be a new culvert installed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we're hoping to do some of the pre-works in 2025,
Mm-hmm.
but we anticipate that the actual approvals
Mm-hmm.
won't be in time to do any construction in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we were proposing 2026 for construction.
Yeah, and I thank you very much, because I know the general public and many of the Walnut Grove residents, not necessarily the people who live north of that intersection, but it's safety, and it's something, and I know there's a railroad track there, and I know it's not easy, but it's important. Safety is important. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation. What's come out of this process for me, having, I think, been on council almost for years, this has been at the table being reviewed and discussed and reviewed and discussed, is there's two, again, please do correct me if I'm wrong, there's two incompatible objectives. Don't reduce the quantity of parking and make the street awesome for bikes and slow the cars down. Would you confirm or agree that those two objectives are incompatible? You're not going to have the same quantity of parking if you make bike lanes and thin lanes and create the design you've done,
Right.
which is designed to slow vehicles. Is it fair, or do you feel that if council asked you, you could look at the design and potentially retain some of the parking in the areas that's losing it and still meet the objective of active transportation and reducing vehicle speed?
Thank you, Your Worship. It would be very difficult. One of the goals of the original design was to try and minimize the impact on the existing boulevards. There's existing sidewalks and very mature landscaping. So really the only way to try and fit in another active transportation facility would be to maybe create a multi-use path. But that would require completely reconstructing the boulevard. So we didn't really want to go that way. We felt that this was a compromise between the parking and the active transportation sort of facilities. But you're right, it is a bit of a competition between the two, and it really depends on how you want to prioritize it.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, and I think that that's sort of the issue that's slowing the project down as you attempt to try to reconcile that. The last thing I wanted to just confirm that I have it correct, that for arterial roads in other areas of the township that are far denser, the amount of parking on arterial roads is 0. And here we have an arterial road with significant quantity of on-street parking. So there would be a perception that it's coming down, but for many other parts of the township that are far denser than this area, this is actually a significant amount of parking available on an arterial roadway.
Thank you, Your Worship. That's fairly correct. The only other areas we have parking on arterial roads is there's a similar situation on 208 Street in Walnut Grove. It's also signed as temporary parking. And we also have temporary parking on Fraser Highway in Walnut Grove. And I think those are the only locations where that actually occurs.
Yeah, so I think when you talk about a 0, we're talking about 80th Avenue, or we're talking about 208 that's within Willoughby, or 202 within Willoughby. The prevailing standard is to not permit on-street parking on arterial, and this is finding the middle ground in arterial in an area of the township that is far less dense than the areas I just mentioned, right?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Yeah, so I think that's something to consider as well. The next steps, just to confirm, or for council to consider this again during the budget process.
So we've, as we highlighted, the intersection works, council has already pre-approved that for 2025. Construction would be part of the 2026 process. At this point, we haven't brought forward the entire corridor improvements for council to consider. Council could choose to bring that forward in 2025 or 2026, but it's currently not included in the proposed budget.
Okay, well, I think that's good to know that it will require some additional follow-up then. But it's there as a project that is actively being designed that could be funded if council were to look at that.
Yeah.
So this presentation could also be referred to the budget, so it's formally raised there.
That's correct, Your Worship.
Yeah, so that might help. And then the last part is just to remind council, because the 96th and 216th intersection has been pre-approved and funded, and it's going to take that long to be constructed in 2026 because of the WSA approval. Could you remind council about that, please?
That's correct, Your Worship. There's the ditches on both sides, on the north side, are classified as a water course. And the existing north leg crosses a water course, which has to be reconstructed. Typically, those environmental approvals take about 18 months to get. So we are not in a position to do that construction in 2025. It would be 2026, and likely in the fisheries window, August, September.
2026. So it's important to identify these projects and fund them, because they may not be delivered for multiple years given senior levels of government or other complications. Yeah, so that's great. So thank you very much for their presentation. I appreciate that. I will make a motion to refer this presentation to the 2025 budget process. That's seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on that referral? Seeing none, I'll call the question on that referral. That carries unanimously. Let's go to 3:30, unless anyone wants to break now. We can finish reports to council. Okay, so we'll move on to E1, Agricultural Land Commission application number 100457. Does anybody wish to move? Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Rins. Is there any discussion on E1? Seeing none, call the question on E1. That carries unanimously. Item E2, I'll move it. Is there a second? Or seconded by Councillor Rins? Is there any discussion on E2? Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I just wanted a quick housekeeping question. Anything that we do here is contingent upon getting this important application through. Given there's different applications through the ALR, and given that the type of land is there, is there an accelerated or a different approach that can be taken by the Land Commission, if I may, through the chair?
Through your worship, Councillor Ferguson, the subject application is a non-farm use application. Typically on these ones, and we've seen similar applications from Metro Vancouver and Campbell Valley Park, they've been fairly speedy relatively in their turnaround time, so it could be a matter of months.
Yeah, because I know how important this is, and thank you very much indeed.
Councillor Bailey.
Really good to see this moving ahead, because both the rowing community and the and mainly fishing powerboat community really want to get away from each other, and this will serve that purpose. So good to see this moving ahead.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Cooner, is it, I don't want to get too much into the details, but is it true that the township has the position that this process is a formality? How much can you say?
That is correct, Your Worship. Historically, we've taken the position that we do have the approval. However, we are in discussion with ALC staff members who have advised us to go through the procedure, as there has been some concern when it comes to documentary evidence to establish that at this time.
Yeah, so if this, yeah, I think we'll leave it there. Okay, so I'm going to call the question on E2. That carries unanimously. Item E3, development permit application number 101425. I'll move it, seconded by Councillor Rint. Is there any discussion on E3? Seeing none, call the question on E3. That carries unanimously. Item E4, development permit application number 101357. Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Is there any discussion on E4? Seeing none, call the question on E4. That carries unanimously. Item E6, disaster risk reduction climate adaptation funding program. Does anybody wish to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Van Popta. Is there any discussion on E6? You have a question? All right. Go ahead.
Through your worship to staff, didn't, regarding 56th Avenue and slope stabilization, didn't we just approve a project, or is this a different area of 56?
Through your worship, this is a different location, just further to the west of the previous project.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other discussion, call the question on E6. That carries unanimously. Item E7, 2024 ICBC road improvement grants. Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Rint. Is there any discussion on E7? Seeing none, call the question on E7. That carries unanimously. Item E8, cricket pitch options to approve funding to install a cricket pitch at Bell Park in Brookswood. I'll move that, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on E8? Seeing none, call the question on E8. That carries unanimously. We'll take a 5-minute recess and return here at 3:10. What time is it here? I'll see. Yes, 7 minutes, 3:10. Thank you. Okay, we'll get back underway. Bylaws for first and second reading. Official community plan amendment, rezoning application number 100286, bylaw number 6055, 6056, moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Rent. Is there any discussion on F1? Seeing none, call the question on F1. That carries unanimously. Item F. Okay. Councillor, move on to item F2, official community plan amendment application number 100230, bylaw number 6033. Just to move that. Moved by Councillor Rent, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on F2? Call the question on F2. That carries. Councillor Richter absent. Bylaws for first, second, and third reading. G1, construction sound exemptions, bylaw number 6050. Moved by Councillor Van Popta, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on G1? Councillor Van Popta.
Yeah, I'd like to move an amendment.
Yeah, no other speakers. Go ahead.
In the bylaw itself, item 2.1, I'd like to amend the Saturday hours from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. to match the Monday to Friday hours, as most of these other municipalities in this report have done as well.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, call the question on that amendment. That carries unanimously. Back to the main motion as amended. Is there any other discussion? G1 as amended. Seeing none, call the question on G1 as amended. That carries unanimously. G2, tree protection fees and charges bylaw amendment, bylaw number 6045, moved by Councillor Rent, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on G2? Seeing none, call the question on G2. That carries unanimously. G3, 2025 permissive tax exemptions, bylaw number 6058, moved by Councillor Rent, seconded by Councillor Van Popta. Is there any discussion on G3? Seeing none, call a question on G3. That carries unanimously. G4, temporary borrowing bylaws, bylaw number 6064, 6065, 6066, 6067, moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Rent. Any discussion on G4? Seeing none, call the question on G4. That carries with Councillor Kunst opposed. J1, that's back on the floor. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rent. Is there any discussion on this? I believe, Ms. Barr, I read it again, and I just wanted to make sure that there's no concern about this issue in relation to a definition. But if you don't have any, then we'll just re-adopt it. No concern? Okay, great. I'll call for the discussion on G1. J1. It's moving very quickly here. J1. Councillor Martins.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm here for this conversation. And maybe this is just an oversight, but I'm not in the mind of the mover, so I wanted to ask. In the first point, section 3.1.6, the original wording currently in the Code of Conduct policy says not use public resources that are not available to the public in general, such as staff time, equipment, supplies, or facilities for private gain or personal purpose. And in this amendment, we have removed the term staff time. So with that removed, what I'm seeing is that it's okay to use staff time for personal gain or election campaigning purposes. Is that the intent?
Mr. Cooner, would that be your interpretation? I believe staff resources, public resources would cover staff time. But if you have a concern, we can certainly put it back.
Your Worship, that would be staff's understanding. However, as you are the mover or the...
I believe we vetted this, so I think
Yes.
that concern's been covered.
As long as the chair clarifies that concerns on the record, then that should be covered. In the event you want further clarification, amendment can be proposed.
I don't think anybody's expecting staff to be campaigning for us on staff time.
I would like to move an amendment that it be put back in since the words were in the policy before and now they're being removed. I feel that's a change that I'm not comfortable with. So if I can make a motion that we add back in staff time.
All right, is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Kunst. Yeah? Okay, any other discussion?
And the reason for that, if I can speak to it?
Sure.
Thank you. Because it was in there before and now it's been removed, I do not want there to be some sort of a loophole or suggestion that we've removed it, so now it's okay. And I just think, because obviously that's not the intention here from what I'm hearing, and we wouldn't want to use staff time for our own personal use, and I think that needs to be put back in.
All right, I think Mr. Cooner has covered it off that this is redundant, so I don't support it. I'm going to call the question on that amendment. And that amendment is defeated with Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rent, Mayor Woodward, Councillor Van Pup to Councillor Ferguson opposed. Now back to the main motion unamended. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, call the question on J1. That carries with Councillor Richter, Councillor Kunz, Councillor Martins opposed. Mayor and Council report. Does anybody wish to make a report? Councillor Bailey, go ahead.
Yeah, after a prolonged absence at the UBCM AGM, when I used to be a lobbyist there, I returned for the 4 days there, and very different being elected official there, and the conversations that go on, and some of the forums were incredibly informative, but also it was a great place to also go and talk directly to the politicians. Minister Fleming and Minister Callon were at one where we had some discussions about single staircase amendments to the code, and it's great to be able to have those kind of upfront conversations with people, with your peers, and very informative. It was a lot, like I said, a lot different being a lobbyist and being an elected official.
Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. And like Councillor Bailey and a few others, had the chance to attend UBCM, and maybe it's an election year thing, but I found it to be less informative, I think, than my previous experience at UBCM, but still had the opportunity to learn from a few different town halls and seminars, some really valuable information, especially around food security. Got to ask the Minister of Education a question or two in regards to how we build our schools and the relationship with our school board. So that was informative and great, and it was really good to see a few old friends and colleagues at UBCM as well. So still worthwhile, but we'll be interested to see what it's like at a non-election year again.
Councillor Ferguson.
No, actually, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually attended the UBCM as well. I actually like going during election years because there's kind of an opportunity to really ask tough questions of our elected officials and those also that wish to be in that position. Anything from housing to hospitals to transportation, roads, forestry, wildfires. And this year they had, I think, a whole day for Indigenous relations. So there's a lot of things on the table that I think was a worthwhile convention. And one of the high points for me was when you get people from the media speaking, and I think most of us, if not, they should look into George Strobanopoulos, who's been an interviewer of people for years and years, including heads of state. He's even interviewed the new king. And he talks about, what should we be doing as elected officials and what type of things should we be exploring? And he says, don't just take what's out in social media and out there posted by people, both Canada, United States, and abroad about what is actually happening. He said, try to dig a little bit deeper and get the true story. And don't be afraid to ask the right questions. And don't be afraid to represent your community the best you can by asking the right questions and doing the right thing. And I think that he had a very, very good and excellent presentation. And those in attendance, most delegates were very impressed by that. I also wanted to point out that we had the Council of Councils the week before, and it was well attended, and lots of questions about how we deliver infrastructure and how we fund infrastructure. And as we all know, costs are going up for many things, bridges, projects, tunnels, the list goes, hospitals, the list goes on. So it was a very good, and I believe we're going to be having another one pretty soon, next month, I believe. So it was a very well attended. Also, I wanted to put a big thank you out to Mayor Brad West and his team for, it's an excellent facility they have in Port Coquitlam, and also the fact that he is the home of Terry Fox, and they have an excellent presentation there. And Terry Fox Day was, and the run was the next day, which many of us attended in Langley here. Thank you.
Councillor Martins?
Thank you. I too was at UBCM, and not to repeat what's already been said, there was great material. Another aspect of that conference that I really appreciate is the opportunity to network with people, elected officials from other municipalities, and learn from them about things that are topical for them, the ways they're doing business, and perhaps learning some new ideas and sort of looking beyond just Township of Langley specific. There's always something to gain from the networking aspect. So I was happy to be there.
Yeah, UBCM was interesting this year, given that it was days from the writ drop. Lots of announcements that clearly had more to do with campaigning than governing. So I would have preferred maybe, than speaking against Councillor Ferguson liked it, I thought it really decreased the usefulness of it this year. I also beginning to question the cost to send every member of council that chooses to go. Might be worth considering that in the future. It doesn't clear to me that if there's no minister meetings and there's nothing being planned because it's a week from an election, it's questionable that there's a return on the cost, because it's quite significant. Other than that, the Council of Councils was, I think, quite good. Obviously the controversy surrounding the North Shore wastewater treatment plant continues, and I of course take issue with Mayor West's claim that Port Coquitlam is the lowest tax within the region. We continue to change position on that depending on the household metric that you use to quantify and confirm that. I'll have to send that to him again this year so he stops making that claim and change it to the second or the third, not the first. Any other reports? I'm sure he will. Yeah. Any other? Councillor Van Popte, go ahead.
He also claims he's building the best soccer campus.
Yeah, and I believe it's the best municipality to raise a family as well. And there's no potholes. And although I did see one when I drove through. Is there any other discussion? Any other report? Move any item or any discussion on any item N1 through 7? Nope, nothing. You sure? Anybody want to bring up anything on N1 through 7? Nope. Okay, move on. Oh, Councillor Richter.
Yeah, N7, the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee, there was no council chair present in the minutes. I'm just wondering, was that an oversight?
To your worship, to Council Rector, I believe council members at UBCM.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Great. So any other discussion? Seeing none, move on to item P1. I will move that. Is there a second or seconded by Councillor Rent? Is there any discussion or questions about P1? Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to why we need to provide exemptions from collection for protective services.
Mr. Cooner?
Through your worship, to Councillor Richter, I'll start with a bit of background prior to diving deep into that question. So there's 3 First Nations within reserves land within the township. So it's the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Matsqui. The township essentially has 3 servicing, actually I think maybe more than that, agreements with each of these First Nations that grant the First Nation an opportunity to receive municipal services for a fee. That's such as fire protection, RCMP, garbage collection, and potentially water services. The township invoices these nations based on assessment data provided by First Nation and British Columbia Assessment Authority. So this is separate from paying for water, sewer, etc. The intent here appears to be to have it more in line how we treat our permissive tax exemption with nonprofit organization, churches, and other organizations. They receive a tax break. That tax break is specifically in relation to some of the services we provide, but it's not in relation to the metered water, sewer.
Okay, so are other communities providing an exemption to the First Nations that reside in their areas on protective services, or are we the only ones doing this? And if we're the only ones doing this, why would we do this?
Your Worship, to Councillor Richter, I believe there is other municipalities that provide the services. Whether they collect or invoice the nations for that, I cannot comment at this time and can advise potentially at a later date.
So, but this motion is basically saying we're going to provide exemption. We're not going to send them an invoice anymore.
Your Worship, to Councillor Richter, that is correct. The service will continue, but the collection of the funds for the service may cease.
Okay. And have we had issues with collecting from them in the past? Have they complained about the services that we're charging for?
Your Worship, to Councillor Richter, we haven't had any issues in collection. We received timely payments from the nations. There may have been some concerns in relation to service being provided, potentially, but that's just some concerns from certain members within protective service that might have relayed that to senior management staff.
Okay, so we're looking at about $1.5 million here in fees that we would normally collect and haven't had a problem collecting. I'm at a loss to understand why we wouldn't just continue on collecting them.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump in, Mr. Cooner. So maybe there's others that are, so right now, if you read number 2, the 1.47 million is tax exemptions being granted to places of worship, nonprofits, and other charities. That is been in place for many years, and that's the amount for a number of groups of places of worship, not First Nations.
Okay. So if we're going to provide an exemption on these fee-for-services, what is the total dollar impact of that?
Mr. Cooner, I think we estimated around 110,000, something like that.
To Your Worship, to Councillor Richter, I'd estimate a bit higher just in case I missed an invoice or an agreement. 125 to 150 max.
Okay.
So 125 to 150.
Mr. Cooner can follow up with council with the exact number. This would be presented to council in the budget process, I believe, Mr. Cooner.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And we haven't received a request from any of the councils of those First Nations requesting us to stop billing them?
Your Worship, to Councillor Richter, there might have been had some concerns in relation to the service, but I'm not aware of any discussions that might have taken place between mayor and council, and if those requests were made directly to members of council or the mayor.
Okay, well, I did not receive did somebody on this council get requested to do this? And if somebody on the council got requested to do this, why wouldn't they have been directed to come and speak to all of council?
That would be up to the individuals, Councillor Richter.
So you did not have any meetings with the Matsqui, Katzie, or Kwantlen First Nations?
My calendar's not under discussion today.
Yes, it is. It's in this motion.
No, the motion doesn't specifically relate to any meetings. It relates to whether or not council wishes to consider an exemption for First Nations from collection, very similar to what it's giving places of worship, charities, and nonprofits.
Okay, well, excuse me, but I think I just heard the administrator say that requests may have gone to mayor and council. Well, they didn't come to me. Did they come to any other member of council?
I don't know.
From them?
No, I've received nothing in writing.
Hey, then I think this motion is a little bit on the redundant side. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting discussion. I'd like to focus council on, I think, what's good for a church and what's good for a nonprofit and what's good for a charitable society is good for our First Nation partners in intergovernmental relations and 7 days from Truth and Reconciliation, so day in this country. So I think this is a great initiative for council to consider to treat First Nations in the same way we treat a local church. Councillor Martins?
Thank you. I'm just wondering about the illegal authority. When I read the attachment here, it's referring to the community charter, section 224 and 225, or what allow municipalities to grant permissive tax exemptions. And I'm just wondering, without having the community charter in front of me, if that legislation does allow enough latitude to include outside of the categories that we are already granting tax exemptions to.
Yeah, no, it does not, which is why it says to provide exemptions from collection.
I'm sorry, can you clarify
Mr.
that?
Cooner, can you clarify that for us, please?
To your worship, to Councillor Martins, the community charter allows a municipality to give permissive tax exemption. This is First Nations land. We do not tax the First Nations land, as they're not subject to our local bylaws, nor are they subject to the Local Government Act or Community Charter. The way we provide them services is through a service agreement, so it's like a contract. Through that contract, we would then seize collections of the amount that we would collect pursuant to a contract.
Okay, so, all right, so maybe I'm misunderstanding it then. We're not looking at adding them to the list to grant a permissive tax exemption. We're just looking at waiving the cost of the services.
Your worship, to Councillor Martins, that's correct characterization.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, and I believe the exemption for a local church is up to $75,000 a year, for which they would have been paying for protective services, among other services. And so this is looking for council to consider, with reconciliation at the heart of it, that some nations are also being charged a significant amount in relation to others. Is that fair, Mr. Cooner?
That's correct, Your
That's
worship.
correct. So I believe that this is something for council to look at, and I think start the process of providing this in the same way that it's provided to our other community partners like churches and nonprofits and other charity. I think I'm a bit surprised we're even hearing this discussion. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'm looking forward to the report that we're going to get out of this. Similar to a lot of other motions that we've discussed at this table, might not always agree with the content per se, but I agree with getting a report on it. In this case, I fully agree with this concept, quite frankly. But I did want to get some clarity on it's specific to the protective services portion of the servicing agreement, correct? It's not on the entire servicing agreement.
Mr. Cooner?
Your worship, to Councillor Pratt, the intent would be to have it in line with how we treat our permissive tax exemptions with the place of worships and nonprofit societies. It would be protective services and potentially some of the other services the municipality provides, without garbage collection or et cetera. But we would still, the intent, I believe, and the chair can clarify, it would still maintain the meter, water, and sewer. Still go through with the charges on that as we do with places of worship and nonprofits.
Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if I did want to say in this particular item, I mean, we are council's looking to read a report on these issues, and I'm sure when the report comes forward, we'll be able to have a better understanding. But what I did want to say, and I'm hearing it today a little bit, I have not had any discussions with Catesy or Kwantlen regarding this issue, but what I have heard over the years of serving at Metro Vancouver in Indigenous relations role, both as on a committee and vice chair, is the fact that the spirit of reconciliation is out there. And I know the Township of Langley, is amongst other folks, are doing the best they can to open up and reach out in the spirit of reconciliation. For example, I didn't say it because I didn't go this year, but I've gone many years to the Stolo Nation powwow, and I've gone other years where it's an excellent activity at the Langley Event Center. And I know that in the spirit of reconciliation, we provide a number of opportunities for them to use our facility. Not for free, but an opportunity for them to be involved and use the facility. And That, I believe, I hope, is appreciated. And I think this and other means, a spirit of reconciliation, is appreciated as well. And I'm sure those that would be reading or just seeing this particular application in front of us, not application, and report asked in front of, would be appreciative of seeing that. So I would like to thank the mayor and those involved. This is a good step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Martins?
Thank you. And I just wanted to come back to this. So the purpose of my question was just, I am actually confused because of the language about permissive tax exemptions. I think that's where I was not understanding that, and with the community charter. So what I'm hearing here is it's the spirit of reconciliation, and I appreciate it. I wish that language had been included in here to start with, that's where we're leading from. Because it is very important, and agreed, especially with having just had the powwow, we're reminded of it, and then the holiday, well, the day off coming up for us to be able to honor and consider personally reconciliation. I look forward to that event at the Derek Doubleday Arboretum. But it just causes me another question maybe on, you know, this is a one-off. Do we have some sort of a township document, maybe identifying objectives, working towards reconciliation, reviewing potentially our policies or our practices or anything like that? Because I think this is actually a jumping off point to perhaps a larger conversation.
Mr. Kuhn?
Through your worship to Council Martins, we can check with the policy department to see if there's anything currently and advise council on that.
That would be great. I appreciate that.
Yeah, appreciate that. I think that is where this is coming from. I mean, I have met with Matsuki, Quatesy, and Kwantlen multiple times as the mayor, as the Township of Langley, and I've heard their concerns. I've listened to them, talked to them, and gotten to know them in a great way. And some of the concerns they expressed were along these lines. And I think it's here for a report to council to discuss that, and everybody's free to go and talk to them and meet with them on their own. I don't know why it has to turn into a fishing expedition of who met with whom and everything's a conspiracy. I think it would be nice to just do a good thing once in a while, and this really was coming from a good place based upon meeting with them and getting to know them and hearing their concerns within these service agreements, specifically as it relates to almost $1.5 million handed out in tax exemption to others, but not to them. And I heard those concerns and brought it to council for a report. So with that, I'll call the question on P1. That carries. Councillor Richter opposed. P2, traffic calming options for Gloucester Industrial Estates. I'll move that. Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on P2? Seeing, oh, Councillor Richter.
Yeah, same basic question as the last one, which is, have we received issues about racing in Gloucester Industrial Estates?
Mr. Cooner?
To your worship to Councillor Richter, there has been several complaints in relation to car racing in the specified area in Gloucester Estates.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kunst?
So with that complaint, I'm just trying to figure out, unless you're a long haul truck driver and you're bumping your way through Gloucester, if there's another way to maybe mitigate the racing, because is there another option so that the trucks are not having to deal with just a whole bunch of speed bumps?
Yeah, I think that's in the motion, Councillor Kunst, to install traffic calming and or other anti-racing measures with minimal disruption to larger trucks.
Okay.
So I think that was a concern. I think it was easy to anticipate being raised. I don't think you need to see complaints. I think all you have to do is drive down there and look at the skid marks all over Gloucester Industrial Estates. Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, it's not only the racing aspect of it. When you're talking to the police about going out there to deal with these, it's a safety concern for the police. They go out there and there are sometimes hundreds of people out there, and you have 1 or 2 or 3 police officers go there, and they have had confrontations, and I'm glad to see this because the police get put in some, and this is not the only location, get put in some very dangerous situations where there are hundreds of people around and there are only a few police. So I like this.
I saw it firsthand on the so-called burnout night in Langley on the night before cruising. I saw it for myself and did talk to not only the watch commander but also the person that was kind enough to give me the ride along, and talk to them at length about some of the challenges with enforcement and why a small detachment relatively is unable to deal with huge crowds that sometimes assemble where enforcement becomes a real problem. So I've been learning quite a bit about it, and I think we've been reached out to and contacted by businesses, residents within the area, and Gloucester Industrial Estates very often is operating on a 24-hour basis. It's not shutting down completely. So there are workers there at night, there are truckers coming and going, there are people there in 24 hours. And there have been a number of close calls that I've personally heard of from the businesses there. And I think they've been asking for something to be done for years, and nothing has been done. And I think it's appropriate now to look at this report and see what can be done. Councillor Van Popta?
Yeah, so the drag race scene is something that does exist in the valley in general, all the way out to the North Shore. It opens up a broader question because they'll fluctuate between Campbell Heights and Gloucester. So do we have to start looking at permitted areas for I'm not sure we can. It just travels from municipality to municipality, so perhaps there could be a regional kind of a way to address the needs for this type of activity. The people that I've talked to that have attended these scenes, it's not for criminal intent. It's I don't know. We do need to address it somehow. And just shoving them from one municipality to another isn't necessarily addressing it.
Reopen Langley Speedway.
Speedway is circular.
All right. So I appreciate that. There has been some discussions as well, but not necessarily going that far, but also having some cooperation to provide different members of the car community to have a place to go that doesn't necessarily have other people there that are there for different purposes other than to celebrate their cars with other people that celebrate cars. What I saw in Surrey especially is a significant issue that does need to be addressed. That, I'll call the question on P2. That carries unanimously. Item P3, I'll move that. Seconded by Councillor Rent. Is there any discussion, questions on P3? Councillor Richter.
Yes. So I understand the political aspects of separating these out, but I'm not sure that this council doesn't have a say with some of those other bodies, specifically Metro Vancouver and or TransLink. I'm wondering what it costs or what it's going to cost to have a separate property tax bill in 2025 for these authorities, different from our bill.
Mr. Cooner?
Your Worship, to Councillor Richter, the intent of this motion seems to request a staff report. In the staff report itself, there should be financial implications to see the cost associated with potentially implementing this new policy.
Okay, but is this something that absolutely needs to be done? Because directing staff to prepare a report is creating more work for staff. And I'm not convinced. For the taxpayer, it's just, what's the bottom line? What do I have to pay? Not us pointing the finger and saying, well, it's not all our fault. Well, a large part of it is our fault.
Is there a question in there, Councillor Richter?
No, it's a comment.
Okay.
I think this is a political motion that's totally not necessary.
Councillor Van Popta?
Yeah, we talk a lot about transparency with our taxpayers and how the money is and taxes are being spent. And I think this is a great tool if we do get this report and like what we see in explaining to our residents how taxation works. It's a consistent question that comes up all the time and for people to have more information is never should never be something that is questioned. So I think the more information that they have, perhaps the less questions we'll have coming into City Hall and things like that. So I think this is a good report to get.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, I agree since I've proposed the motion. I think it's important for the public to understand who to lobby for decreased taxes. So calling the Township of Langley Mayor's office or members of council are sending a letter to their mayor and council about what they're being taxed by Metro Vancouver and TransLink isn't going to be effective and isn't going to get anywhere. And to complain to property tax staff about the size of their bill when almost half of it is coming from entities that Township of Langley is only collecting the tax for. We had some property owners now paying tens of thousands of dollars in school tax. And that is being levied by the provincial government. And it's got Township of Langley at the top and a number at the bottom, and they think it's property tax. I think it is time there to really look at outlining for the community that there are other levels of government that are using property tax with no ramifications to them. They're not hearing the complaints. They're not hearing from homeowners. They're not hearing from renters rents are going up because of property tax. They're not hearing from businesses paying thousands of dollars annually to TransLink for not a single bus. And so I think it is important to start to communicate better that there are other levels of government that are driving up property tax at a much faster extreme rate than the township, and to explain, even for the benefit of our staff, to explain to our public, to explain to our residents that if we're going to be passing on, historic tax increases in the low digits, below 5%, but others are raising taxes 15%, that their tax bill is going up accordingly because of those other entities of which we do not control. Councillor Richter?
Well, that's a bit of a false assumption because, as I recall, the mayor and Councillor Ferguson sit on Metro Vancouver. Have you been voting for the Metro Vancouver budgets? Because if you have been, I think the public here has the right to complain to you. They don't have to go complain to Metro. You're their rep on Metro. Same thing with TransLink.
Yeah, no, it's potentially true for Metro Vancouver, but 7 votes for the township out of 145 is not a significant amount to control the direction that Metro Vancouver is going. The board workshop process there is very different from ours. There's very little, as you know, Councillor Richter, you served there 4 years. There's not a lot of influence coming from the Township of Langley to affect double-digit tax increases there. Mayor's Council will set the funding for TransLink, but TransLink decides where the money is spent. There's a significant disconnect there between the Mayor's Council and the Board of Directors at TransLink. So again, I don't think that's also true. A lot of the taxation that's being permitted by TransLink is within provincial legislation. So again, I think a lot of that just isn't true. P3, I think, is this motion is heading in the direction for council to look at the option to see what this would look like, to, again, have our property taxpayers focus on what the Township of Langley is doing separately from what Metro Vancouver, TransLink, BC assessment, school tax is doing to the property tax bill. We could spend hours at this table, which I think we will in the fall, and we have in the past, delivering a 2% tax increase, or a 5 or 6% tax increase when inflation is 10%. We'll spend a lot of time making tough decisions to keep that tax bill as low as we possibly can. We'll find millions in savings, and then the current government will increase school tax by tens of thousands of dollars. Or Metro Vancouver will raise taxes by 15%. TransLink will raise taxes on our businesses, in some cases 20%. And so I think it's important to move in this direction, and there's a lot of interest from other municipalities in the region in this, based upon the reality of what's happening to property tax increases that are beyond local government control. That, I'll call the question on Councillor Ferguson, go ahead.
Since I was named by my colleague, I like the idea this is an opportunity, but still, I always look forward to when folk phone me up about regional district matters, and so I can give them as best an answer as I can. Sometimes it's very complicated when you look at about liquid waste and I guess there's a lot of steps, including how liquid waste is determined through a colony of microscopic bugs and dewatering devices, the different cursory and primary, secondary treatment. So there's enough, but I also love to talk to the residents about what we in the Township of Langley have in the way of regional parks and water courses and the way we are kind of doing an excellent job with zero waste and recycling and collection of. So there's a lot of positive things we can talk to our public about regarding regional government. So I always look forward to listening to our residents about the regional issues. I'm sure you do as well, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
That will call the question on P3. That carries. Councillor Richter opposed. P4, I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Wren. Is there any discussion on P4? Councillor Richter.
Yeah. Was LAPS consulted on this?
Can you define consultation for me?
Well, LAPS are the volunteer organization that has for the last 2 decades provided animal control services in the township and in the city. It would seem to me that a move like this to have our bylaws officers, I mean, what do they know about animal control? Are they even trained to deal with animal control? Take over a job that I have heard no complaints about in terms of how it's being delivered by the organization in question. I mean, I don't even know why we're going down this path without having talked to LAPS first. At minimum, I think this motion should be deferred for a discussion with LAPS. At minimum, out of respect for the work that they have done over the years in this community. And this business of exclusive to Township of Langley, I'm tired of this council hitting at other municipalities. I'm sure the city of Langley is paying a fee for service that is provided by LAPS, and that's one of the revenue streams that LAPS have. So why don't we have information on the revenue stream that's generated for LAPS out of their city contract? And why would we demand to take it away from them? I mean, animals don't know boundaries. You can't tell me that a cat that gets pregnant in Langley City isn't going to end up with kittens in Langley Township. We don't know that. Same thing with Abbotsford. This is just myopic, short-sighted, and bordering on being vindictive. But I really do think, at minimum, we should be talking to LAPS, and I will be happy to move a deferral on this if this motion is going to
so
proceed.
that's a lot. I'm not sure where to begin. I have met with LAPS to discuss with them some of their feedback prior to moving this motion. So I believe there's been some initial consultation, and there'll be much more. I believe this is for a report to council to get you some of this information that you're looking for. I don't see how a review of animal control after 20 years to look at some options as the township will look to the future to double in size again is vindictive. I mean, I kind of reject that characterization. Not everything is vindictive. Not everything's bad. Not everything, requires the speechifying. It's just a report to council to consider potential changes that may be necessary within the next 10 to 15 years to ensure quality and sufficient animal control and sheltering service levels are maintained as the Township of Langley is preparing to add another 100,000 people by 2045. I think we're doing that within a number of areas, and I think it's important to do that. I think it's obvious when you move a motion about LAPS that these kinds of speeches are going to get made. I don't think they're necessary. I don't think they're helpful. They're not improving service levels. They're not maybe even seeing something positive will come out of it for LAPS in many ways, because I concur. They have done great work in the community. This is looking at potentially supporting them in a different way or evolving services in a different way to serve residents better and to have a look at it, to have a review of it, and to consider it. And that's what I came here to do. I came here to look at new ideas, make reforms. and I didn't come here to vote against getting reports to council. Councillor Kuntz, go ahead.
Well, after you say all that, and I read number 1, and that's really what it comes down to for me. I mean, if this was to really to improve and strengthen animal protection and the many programs that LAPS provides, I could possibly support that, but it actually seems like our judgment's been clouded by the desire to isolate the city of Langley. And I just don't feel like that's in the best interest of the residents of either municipality, so I can't support this. I mean, if you take out number 1, I might be able to consider it, but you know, I live on the border of the city and of the township. I live in the township, and we all have animals, and I you know, this doesn't really make any sense to not include the city of Langley in some of these updated commitments. So I won't be supporting it.
Yeah, so again, I think we're constantly arguing against something that isn't happening here sometimes. Cornering, I don't even know what the language you say, cornering Langley City or something. I think isolating, okay. I think would make this very similar to something along the lines of this council endorsing some of the issues we're having around swimming lessons capacity to serve residents and taxpayers of the Township of Langley. I think if there's a significant need to potentially invest in capital at LAPS to expand service levels for a municipality that is going to be 250,000 people, that you know, the city of Langley's contribution to that will be zero. That'd be fairly consistent with their position, be very consistent with what I've heard from multiple members of their council. It's not a priority, they don't have any money, et cetera, et cetera. So we're in the same situation there, that I think there's no sense doing this review without that context. It can of course be rejected if it's not sufficient, it provides, you know, relatively little improvement in service levels. Again, here we are voting against staff reports. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I don't disagree with all of what's been said by my colleagues. I don't agree with everything that's been said by yourself, but I think from my point of view on this one, it comes down to, if I really disagree with the bylaws that are proposed, and I really disagree with the system that's proposed once we get this report, to me, that's the time that I will be vociferously debating it. Right now, I look forward to the continued consultation with LAPS on this, because they have done tremendous work, and I appreciate members of the public reaching out with their comments on this, and I appreciate the conversation I've had so far. So I don't see this as the end of the road in any way, shape, or form. I see it as the beginning, and I think that it will be an ongoing conversation. And, you know, if it was mentioned about the city of Abbotsford's animals not knowing cross-jurisdictional boundaries, well, why don't we have a surveying agreement with them and with Surrey and with the fish that might swim across from Maple Ridge? So for me, it's an issue of, we do need to take care of our own, and I think that's what we're exploring doing here. So I'm happy to support it at this stage. At a future stage, who knows?
Councillor Martins?
Thank you. I'm going to start with a question, and then I have some comments, if I may, through the chair to staff. Item number 2, improved service levels for residents with deceased pets or deceased, lost, or stray animals. Currently, that is not part of the LAPS contract, if I understand that it's actually our engineering staff. So are we looking now at the bylaw department taking this over? I just wanted, I didn't quite follow why this was included in here.
Oh, well, I'll just answer that. It's included in there because if you look at the first paragraph, council to consider animal control services to be potentially provided by, and I think keyword there being potentially, provided directly by the Township of Langley Bylaw Department, and then would consider number 2 on potentially increasing service levels for that issue, which has come up recently.
Yeah, so, but my understanding is it's a service provided by engineering, and that's my question. So are we getting away from the engineering department being the ones to recover deceased pets and stray animals, and move it into bylaw? Are they now going to be responsible? Is that the spirit of this? Again, I don't understand why this is part of bylaw.
No, I get that. Mr. Cooner, maybe confirm that there's multiple service providers for this issue.
Yes, to your worship, to Council Martins, it would depend on the location of the deceased animal, whether it would be LAPS or engineering, or we would have to contact a different organization. This motion itself would allow us to at least explore the opportunity to see whether that would still rest within engineering or whether that option would be a part of a department that would be created within the township, a Langley Bylaw Enforcement Department. So it's premature to come to some type of conclusion or position on how we would move forward with this service.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to clarify something you said. So LAPS is involved in the recovery of deceased pets and stray animals? Because my understanding is that wasn't part of their agreement.
Your worship, to Councillor Martins would have to review the exact elements of their agreement, and I think it has to do with location of where the deceased animal is, whether the deceased animal is in private property, public property, etc.
Okay, so hopefully, if I'm in this line of questioning, perhaps that can be some clarification be provided in the report. That would be great. First of all, I want to say thank you to LAPS for their incredible work in this community for over 2 decades. And I'm not really comfortable with this motion, the way it's come about and the wording. And I hear at this table more often than not the terms, it's just for a staff report. It's just a staff report. Well, again, like I'm seeing, there seems to be a theme. It's not just a staff report. It's a staff report with prescribed outcomes. And the problem I have with that is if we're truly exploring the situation with an open mind, looking to identify gaps and maybe some efficiencies and some ways of moving forward, as Mayor, you've said, like as the community grows, and I get that things change over time. I don't think we would have such prescribed directions on what it is we're going to do to fix the problem. I think we'd be starting from a point of exploration. And I worry that this is directing staff to what it is we want to see. And I don't think we're the specialists in animal control. And frankly, our bylaw department, unless there's people who have been hired there that I'm unaware of, I don't believe we actually have animal control experts in-house currently. That is a specialty requiring additional education. And so I worry that we're not actually leaning on the true experts in our community who maybe could help guide us in this process of how to move into the next generation of what this might look moving forward. The other comment I have is with regards to separating out city and the township, and the suggestion that the taxpayers are tired of picking up the cost of the city. Well, first of all, my understanding is we actually are gaining revenue at LAPS from the city. So I don't believe that's actually a problem. But secondly, and more importantly, who's looking after the animals? The animals do not pay taxes. They're not considered residents. They don't have passports that I'm a resident in the municipality or the city, unless of course they might have a license. But we're talking about stray animals. Typically do not have the proper identification. I mean, case in point, around the corner from me, there was a black bear walking down the street. I'm pretty sure he wasn't born and raised in Walnut Grove. He traveled. That's what animals do by nature, especially strays. They roam. And so I don't even understand why we're getting into which municipality and what we're willing to do what for. And for that reason, I really don't appreciate the spirit of this motion at all. I will not be supporting it. I would have been open to it if it was an open-ended, let's explore and have conversations and go about it properly, respecting who the experts are in this community that has served us so well for 2 decades.
Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, I have a very different opinion here. I look at this thing and I want to sit there and say, the first one, a commitment to the Langley, to LAPS for it to continue. That doesn't sound like a takeover to me. Sorry, it doesn't. And when I actually have a so-called feral cat that I got at LAPS and have supported, even helped bail Constable Bell out during their thing. And when I was there, I was also told that they're full to the max. They don't have any more room for any more animals. And if that is the situation, which I understand is not only in LAPS, but in many other animal shelters, as you see it on the news, I want to know that if that is in fact. So when people come to either get an animal disposed of, which I have had to do all my life, as your pets die, it is a concern on how can you respectfully dispose of your animal. I want to know if that service is provided, and if LAPS is going to provide it, I will gladly support them. And then when it comes to number 3, an expansion of the current spay and neuter program, damn right. There's too many animals that are not being spayed and neutered, and we have an overflow of especially cats, and it's flooding. So I want to get a report on what's going on out there, and I want to make sure that if LAPS is getting over-serviced, then first I want to, like many other things, including the swimming, where I've been trying to get my granddaughter in for 2 years and haven't been able to because of other people in other jurisdictions coming in. I want to make sure that the residents of Township get what they pay their taxes for and not subsidize across the river or in the city.
Councillor Ferguson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's an awful lot of discussion about this, and perhaps it's good discussion. There's no such thing as bad discussion. I'm going back in history again. There's a couple of ladies that showed up at council a number of years ago. The 2 Patties, I call them. One was Patty Dale, and she said she wanted to build a shelter for animals, and she wanted to have veterinarians there. She wanted to have lots of areas for park space for the animals to walk. She said she wanted to put together something, and we said the very first thing we said to her, what? That's impossible. And then they came back to us and they said, we've got some money, we've got a group of volunteers, and we've got a big project, fundraising project. And with the 2 Patties working together with a team of volunteers and convincing the Township of Langley to find some land, they built one of the showcase shelters for animals in the whole region. Now they are hitting a point where they really need to expand. They're overwhelmed by a number of things. This is not against the city of Surrey or Abbotsford or city of Langley or otherwise. I'm not sure what that'll be. Perhaps we'll continue on with an expansion. Perhaps they'll help us. I don't know. All I know is that we have a shelter which is very comparable to many shelters, if not better, in the whole region, if not the province. I don't think that voting against a report that has not been repaired is an example of an open mind. Anyway, I will read a future report when it's in front of me. I will critique it, I will ask staff, and if I need to, make amendments accordingly. But voting against something that I haven't seen is not an open mind. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Van Popte?
Yeah, one of the, not the perks, but one of the opportunities that we have as council, as mayor and councillors, is to come to this table with motions. And in those motions are either our ideas or ideas of the community. And we get to write these motions as we see fit. And I don't like the narrative right now that asking for staff report, requesting certain information is somehow bad. It is up to the author of the motion to request what type of information they're looking for. There's opportunities for all of us here to maybe ask for an amendment or to expand the content of these reports, but to just to blanketly say that we're asking for specific information is exactly the reason why we're asking for a report. I like to speak to item 2, which I'm very thankful on a personal level to see, as somebody whose little buddy Ricky went missing in February, and I went for a walk 3 times a day looking for him for a month, only to find out he got hit by a car and died. It took going through bylaws to find out where he was and for somebody to bring that to my attention. So if we had a unified way of finding out for people who are grieving to find their lost pets, it'll serve a lot of people. So I appreciate this. Oh, why am I crying over my cat? It's almost been 6 months.
Councillor Richter?
Yes, I'd like to move a deferral of this motion until after a meeting has been held between the council and the CEO and board of LAPS.
Is there a seconder to that? Well, okay, well, we're hearing the deferral. So is there a seconder to the deferral? It's seconded. Councillor Richter, do you have anything more on the deferral?
Yeah. I think Councillor Martin summed it up when she said, this is a directive motion. The outcome is predetermined, and the outcome is predetermined based on the wording in the motion. It's directing staff to report with draft bylaw and agreement amendments to consider animal control services be potentially provided directly by the Township of Langley Bylaw Department, considering 1, exclusive to the Township of Langley, 2, if you've lost your pet and your pet is deceased, then it's your job to take care of that corpse. It's not the community's job to do so. And the third one, again, expansion of the current spay and neuter program exclusive to the Township of Langley residents. This whole motion is offensive because it has left LAPS out entirely, and if this motion is passed the way it's worded, we have essentially said to staff, okay, you can go ahead and talk to LAPS now and tell them this is what we're doing. It's wrong. So my motion is, let's sit down as adults in a room together, both sides, and discuss if this motion is even needed, or if it is appropriate, or what the things are that they might like to see in a report, because they've been completely left out of this at this point.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to repeat again that they have not been completely left out of it. That's just false. Councillor Kunst, go ahead.
Yeah, as I hear all these people talking about it's just a report and I'll make a decision after the report. The report is not going to include the city of Langley. And we all know, let's call a spade here. This isn't really about LAPS. This is about another way of isolating the city of Langley. So, you know, you guys can say whatever you want about, oh, I'll read the report, what you know, there shouldn't be anything against a report.
We're on the deferral.
We'll include the city of Langley. Sorry, I never got a chance to speak about what I was hearing at the table, so.
We took a deferral motion, so that's
So
not
I support the deferral.
It's not on the deferral. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I won't be supporting the deferral simply because it is a motion asking for direction. However, the way I look at this is with every other report that's come across our desk, and you know, I've been defeated when I've asked for reports myself, and I disagree with Councillor Bailey on certain things in his motion later, but there's specific things we can disagree on, and we can drill down into why we disagree on it. And Councillor Bailey comes at it from a section of expertise that I don't have, and I come from something that he doesn't have. So when we get this report, I'm looking forward to the membership of LAPS and the experts telling us how far away we are from something that works well, or how close we are to something that works well, based on everything in this report. If they come back and say, hey, can't take out the city of Langley, I'll take that under advisement, and I'll make my decision. If they don't, then I have a feeling then it's a direction that they don't mind going in. That's what I would take that as. So for myself, I can support this at this stage. Like I said before, don't know about the next one. Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson on the deferral.
A quick
right?
question,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I guess I must be one of some people in the room, other than my council colleagues. If I question the chair, as part of your report to staff, would one of your steps be to meet or talk with the LAPS people, if I may?
Yeah, so I think that that would absolutely be course and to begin that consultation right away.
So it seemed to be, I read into that. It's absolutely clear to me that that's what they're going to do. So I just don't see the purpose for this motion amendment, because it's included in the report and it's been answered. My question's been answered by by staff, and the question asked by councillor colleagues. So there's really no need to support a motion that's, or an amendment that's already in the report. So therefore, I will not be supporting the amendment.
The deferral, yeah, the deferral. Yeah, Councillor Bailey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to speak against this motion. I can't believe this. You're sitting there. When do you ever ask for a report and not give direction? Okay, should we just ask for, how about we just get the staff to report on animals in the whole lower mainland? Why don't we ask township staff to go and include Surrey and Abbotsford, because they're also sitting on the top. And as people said earlier, animals don't know what the municipal boundaries are. So how do we know we haven't got Abbotsford cats coming in and puppies and all that kind of stuff? And Jesus, maybe there's some Surrey dogs sneaking across the border too. So let's include them in the thing. This is a report from township staff on a township resource. I don't care about City of Langley, quite frankly. I was not elected to care about them. And you know what? They've got a council that probably takes the same attitude with, I'm not going to get my staff to talk about the township of Langley. Why would they do that? I'm a township councillor. I want to know what's going on in the township about a township resource. I don't care about the other jurisdictions.
Councillor Martins?
Okay, yeah. I just want to...
This is on the deferral, right?
That's right, thank you. And that is my question. Before I speak, I want to reframe exactly what we're doing with, like, a deferral typically is we wait and bring it back at a later meeting. But I'm hearing something about consultation with LAPS. So can I just get some clarification on what the motion is that we are currently debating?
We're debating deferral until we've had a chance to meet between the CAO board and council. Do I have that correct, Ms. Bauer? It's to have a meeting. That's correct, yeah.
And that's considered in the form of a deferral, is how we accomplish that?
Yes, you could probably do either, but I think to defer it, this would come back after that meeting has occurred.
Okay, thank you. And I would support that. It's really frustrating when you're a subject matter expert and you have others who may not be, who have a piece of information that take it and run with it with ideas and then prescribe those ideas as a solution. I believe you can request a staff report that actually does have actions that aren't so prescriptive in their solutions. The actions.
This is on the deferral, Councilor Martins, not on the
Yes.
motion for the report itself. This is on the deferral.
Thank you, and I will get to that.
Well, please get to it, because we're debating the deferral, not the content of the motion.
Okay, other people have gone on at great length here, been quite passionate, so I feel it's only fair I'd be able to say my piece. So what I would say is I support this deferral because I think it's important to start from a position of what does LAPS have to say? What do the people who are doing animal control in our community have to say? What actually is this whole city impact that we apparently don't care about them anymore and we don't want to service them, when I've actually heard that it's actually a revenue source that helps the township. So the problem I have with suggesting this is just a report to council and requires prescriptive actions. I think the prescription actions can be different, that would be more respectful of the experts. And I'm very happy that we are looking at deferring it so that we can have a conversation. All of us at this table can hear from LAPS and speak with LAPS and get some clarification. Like I said, number two, my understanding is they don't recover deceased pets. So I want to hear more from that. I want to get my questions answered. So for that reason, I will be supporting this deferral, and I think it's always appropriate. We should always come from a position of getting more information and gaining understanding before we're determining next steps. Thank you.
Yeah, so I obviously don't support the deferral. There's many elements in this motion, from dog licensing to capital review to consideration of deceased animals. I think all of that can occur simultaneously with consultation. So I don't view the deferral favorably. I view it as a stall tactic. So I'll pull the question on deferral of P4. And that is defeated with Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rent, Mayor Woodward, Councillor Van Popte, Councillor Pratt, Councillor Ferguson opposed. Now back to the main motion. Councillor Kuntz, go ahead. Okay. So I obviously want to reiterate that the motion itself, I think, has been lost in some of this commentary. We see this sometimes where members of council will have a debate about something that's not actually in the motion. So I think we saw that here today, debating things that just aren't occurring. And so here it is again, it's a direct staff to report to council to consider expansion of, I think to review how animal control services are delivered today and how they would be delivered when the Township of Langley is going to grow to 250,000 people by 2040, according to Metro Vancouver. And a commitment, I'm going to reiterate again, this is why I think it's a bit disappointing to see some of this commentary. Keyword, commitment to lapse, improved service levels for residents, an expansion of the current spay and neuter program, streamlining multi-year options and improvements to dog licensing, a review of capital improvements, renewal, and additions that may be necessary in a 10 to 15 year timeline to ensure quality, animal control, and sheltering service levels are maintained as the Township of Langley continues to grow. If members of council don't support that, I accept that vote. I'm going to call the question on P4. That carries with Councillor Richter, Councillor Kuntz, Councillor Richter, Councillor Kuntz, Councillor Martins opposed. Item P5, I'll move that, seconded by Councillor Rent. Is there any discussion on P5? Councillor Martins.
Thank you. Similar to my question earlier about wording, the word remuneration is in this motion. I'm not in the mind of the mover, so I'm not clear on if remuneration is meant, which is the act of recounting, or maybe perhaps remuneration.
Yeah, maybe a typo here, autocorrect. Mr. Cooner, is that an autocorrect mistake?
Your Worship, I believe that's an autocorrect mistake.
Yeah.
Our understanding is, as you're the chair and this is your motion here, it's you're not talking about remuneration.
We're talking about making money or getting reimbursed theoretically for your time. So I'm going to move to amend that, to change that. Let's clear that up, to change that wording. Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Is there any discussion on making that word change? Nope. Call a question on that amendment to P5. And that carries unanimously. Councillor Martins, go ahead. No, there we go.
That was actually my question, and I was hoping to make that motion, but I'm glad it's been looked after. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So this came out of, I believe it's appropriate to make this change. It was brought to my attention that members of council were expensing mileage to go to Metro Vancouver, where they're paid a per diem, which is quite significant, in addition to their Township of Langley car allowance. So I find that to be something that needs to be addressed and ceased. Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Yeah, so let me get this straight. There are how many municipalities in Metro Vancouver? 23 of them? And they all have representatives at that table. And all those representatives get the same allowance or get the same compensation for the meeting time. But some of those representatives have to travel from the far edges of the region to the meeting location. And so we're being penalized by living in Langley now? Is that how this is going to work? Because I'm pretty sure if you live in Burnaby, you can just hop on the SkyTrain. You don't have to take your car in. But why are we doing this? This just seems punitive to me, and I don't know why it's being done. I don't think it's ever been abused in the past.
Well, we will disagree there, Councillor Richter.
Okay, can you explain to me why you disagree? Like, why do we have to do this?
I don't know. I don't know why everything has to be punitive. I mean, we're just here, I think, making a policy change where there's multiple levels of reimbursement for this item. I think this is something that shows respect to taxpayers in a time when many are struggling to make ends meet.
Okay, but is everybody else in Metro doing this? Or just us?
Mr. Cooner, are you aware of others?
Your Worship, off the top of my head, I do not know every municipality's council remuneration and how their travel allowance and reimbursement of expenses is set up.
Councillor Van Popta, go ahead.
I think it's important to clarify that Metro itself does not give mileage. It's part of our remuneration when we go to a Metro meeting. And the fees that we get at Metro are significant. There's no reason for us to then ask the Township of Langley to reimburse our kilometers and mileage to go to a meeting where we're getting a significant fee. Regardless of whether you live in Burnaby or Township of Langley, to ask for more from your taxpayers, I think is unreasonable. And we're not talking about, meetings where we are not being remunerated, committee meetings, things that fall outside of Langley that we have to travel to. It's specifically to meetings where we're already receiving a significant fund. And if getting an extra $50 or $100 for the kilometers that you travel to that meeting are something that you, as paid counselors, that we cannot afford, then perhaps we should be offering those committee positions to other people who are willing to eat that cost. But I think it's unreasonable for us to be collecting mileage when Metro doesn't even reimburse those mileage. It's specifically the Township of Langley that's reimbursing those mileages.
Yeah, I concur. I think it's not right to be charging the Township of Langley back up to $1,000 to attend meetings where you're paid up to $500. So this is brought forward for council's consideration to not have that continue. That, I'll call the question on P5. That carries. Councillor Richter, Councillor Martins opposed. Councillor Van Popta is, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not going to read it out. It speaks for itself. This came out of some discussions with people who had concerns, especially around the 250th and 56 area. There's not a crosswalk there, and it's too dangerous to cross there, and it would add some ease to students and things like that who are having to travel away from that intersection to get to school. And so the whole corridor does need to be studied. We've seen lots of commentary on speeding and truck traffic, intersections that are in disrepair. So this is just a comprehensive study to get some of that information.
Yeah, I don't see any other speakers. I appreciate this one. This was sort of something came up a couple times last term, which I think got, after COVID hit, we didn't hear about it again. I think there is some work out there that staff have done last term that can be picked up, dusted off, and refreshed to see what improvements can be made there in regards to safe transit to school in this area of Salmon River and others, and look at what potentially can be done over the number of years coming up. I think we do hear about this area a lot, so again, I appreciate this. I think this is long overdue to have staff begin working on this for us. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on P6. That carries unanimously. P7, Councillor Van Popta, go ahead.
Yeah, so this one is, again, with some concerns with area residents who use this off-leash dog park. There's no lighting there, so if we can just get a report on just some minor improvements that we can do to see that this dog park gets used at all times of the year. Some concerns that we could maybe address in the report would be just some general lighting, maybe some shelter, and there's been some significant mud pits in that area, so in that dog park. So if we can look at those things, and there's some temporary fencing, I think that has to do with hydro, if we can maybe look at making those permanent.
And I support it, so I'll second it.
Oh,
is there any other discussion on this one? Seeing none, call the question on P7. That carries unanimously. Councillor Bailey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to move this.
Great. Seconded by Councillor Rint. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to steal a page out of Councillor Ferguson's things.
Oh.
This is the NFPA journal, okay? They are the experts, and they set the standards for the fire industry in North America, and are also followed by other jurisdictions in Europe and other places. So I've talked to Minister Callan 3 times and about the dangers from a firefighter's point of view. And there are many tactical reasons why you want 2 staircases in a wood frame structure with up to 120 people, which I don't know how they're talking about only 20 people per floor. I would like to see how they're gonna they're going to copy that. But I'm not going to go into it just from a working firefighter, was actually an officer and had to make those decisions. I'm asking here that they go, because I talked to both representatives from the Fire Chiefs Association of British Columbia a couple of times, and the BC Professional Firefighters Association. They're the guys that are actually doing the work, and neither of them were adequately or in any other way consulted. So I talked to them. Both of those organizations are opposing this single stair. And then I go back to my discussions with Minister Callan, and he repeatedly says, well, New York City does this and Seattle does this. So if Minister Callan wants to make sure that we're building all stone and concrete structures like all these structures in New York City are done, and if he wants to also fund our fire department to the level that the city of New York and the city of Seattle fund theirs. Let's get to that point, but that would cost a small fortune. So let's get a couple of quotes from the experts in the thing, since Minister Callan didn't. So, Greg Robbins, former deputy chief and the current chair of the International Associations of the Fire and Life Safety, it says, this comes from individuals who have made some money in real estate, not from the industry. And the approach they've taken on this has scared me to death. There are now other institutions that are fire service organizations that also oppose this are the International Association of Firefighters, the Metro Chiefs, a member of the NFPA, a National Association of State Fire Marshals, the National Fire Chiefs Council, the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and many others. So when they're sitting there talking and no one has ever seen anything move as fast on something that was brought forward by one person who's not associated with the fire industry. This is the experts, okay? And it's union, management, it's fire service organizations. This is the people, and they're coming out. There are, as you can see, an awful lot of other quotes that I could use here that are even more damning. And then they sit there and they go to Europe. Well, Europe favors non-combustible construction, such as brick and stone, and they also have smaller jurisdictions, and they have fundamentally different equipment. I'll give you an example. Our helmets are a couple $100. Their helmets are a couple of $1,000. Along with other service things, such like much more modern and more efficient firefighting techniques, but I could go on and on and on. And I don't understand why this government has ignored the requests by the two leading organizations in British Columbia, the IAFF and the Fire Chiefs Association, who are both very vehement in their discussions around this is going to kill people. Whether it kills people that they're trying to evacuate because you can't get them out of, one stairwell goes up, that's the firefighters, and the other stairwell comes down, that's the residents. And let me tell you from a personal experience how hard it is to evacuate certain people if they have disabilities and that, and especially when you use stairwells as what they call an area of refuge. That's where people who have difficulties evacuating, meanwhile you've got firefighters running up if you've only got a single case. I could go on and on and on. But the experts, the NFPA, say this is a horrible idea that, and I quote, scares them to death.
Councillor Pratt?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And one of the things I like the most about Councillor Bailey is whenever we've had vehement disagreements, which have happened in the past, we always usually sit down and hash it out and talk about it, which is why I'm should start by saying I'm supportive of the motion to have the discussion, because the reality with a policy like this, with such a wide-scale change coming from it, it's a lot easier to row the boat when everybody's in it and at least heading in the same direction, as opposed to rowing it and dragging some people behind, right? So having the people who need to be the ones consulted actually consulted makes a lot of sense. And so with this being prescriptive in what it's actually asking for, I can support. I think that in reading the same journal article that Councillor Bailey's quoting from, you have the senior, or one of the senior fire protection engineers for the NFPA saying, hey, if certain conditions are met, it's worth the conversation, which is what I appreciate, having the conversation. So there's certain things that I think if you have the adequate fire protection in an area, if you have the non-combustible materials, if you have the sprinkler, if you have all of those conditions met, then I think it's worth the conversation. Are we there yet as an individual municipality? I haven't seen the evidence of that. So appreciate Councillor Bailey bringing this forward, because we're having the conversation, and hopefully we can escalate it to the point that it should be at.
Councillor Van Popta?
What's most disappointing, not this motion, because I fully agree with this motion, is that in May, I believe it was the Fire Chiefs Association, you'll have to forgive my ignorance on what the official association is called, actually sent a letter to Minister Callon in regards to this exact topic. They were actually asked about single stair egress. They did actually seek the input from the industry, and they decided to choose to go against the recommendations. And I think that's what is most disappointing, is that they had the information and they still chose to go with this route. And I'm thankful for Councillor Bailey trying to tackle this at the municipal level. And I hope to see that this gets reversed, personally. Thank you.
Thank you. First time speakers, Councillor Martins, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I fully support this motion. It's disappointing that we have to do this motion. Sorry, I thought someone was waving at me here. Okay. I think it's disappointing that we have to do this motion. As I was saying earlier, and it certainly applies to this motion, is listening to the experts. And the experts were consulted, and yet they went ahead ignoring the abundance of knowledge and experience that our fire personnel have. And so it really worries me when we put aside people's safety in the spirit of efficiency and politics. And so thank you, Councillor Bailey. Thank you for bringing this up. Thank you for championing this. And I fully endorse this motion. And I hope that perhaps we can add to the voices of others who have expressed their concern on this topic, and perhaps look at getting it reversed.
Councillor Bailey, did you have something more?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a couple more quotes. I didn't quite get them all out the first time. This is a quote from the Metro Fire Chiefs. Allowing residential structures to be built with exemptions or modifications contrary to decades of research and investigation will jeopardize safety. Simply put, lives will be endangered. And one of the things they talk about is, you're talking about Seattle and you're talking about New York. Here's Seattle. We were comfortable with this in Seattle because we have a hydrant on every corner. We have a well-funded municipal career fire department with outstanding response times and a good complement of aerial ladders distributed throughout the city. One, we don't have any true aerial ladders. We have quints, which are not anywhere near that. We do not have fire hydrants on every corner. In fact, we don't have fire hydrants at all in certain areas of our city. And we're a large city compared to an awful lot of the jurisdictions in British Columbia. You saw Surrey just last night lost a structure, and they call it a no water area. That's where you have to bring the tankers in and all that kind of stuff. It's fine and dandy. And by the way, Seattle is looking at rescinding this decades-long single staircase. So it's a huge mistake, and a resolution passed at the UBCM AGM very strongly, and we need the most support that we can possibly get to see if we can get this backed off. And this will be an interesting one. Let's not forget there's an election coming around in less than a month, and it'll be something to see if anyone is going to back this one off after the election.
Yeah, so there was a spirited debate at the Mayor's Committee at Metro Vancouver on this after a delegation from the Surrey Fire Chief. And it was unanimous. Unanimous, even though one decided to endorse it in the press release. It was still unanimous to request that Mayor's Committee from Metro Vancouver will be requesting that this be given a sober second thought and reviewed and go through the normal process for National Code and BC Building Code revisions, which was not followed here. And I believe that that's their biggest concern, that it did not follow the standard process for code revisions. Mr. Richardson, do you know if it's implemented in all code regions in British Columbia, or was it just Lower Mainland? Do we know? Can't remember. I had to go look it up.
Don't have the information off the top of my head, Mayor Woodward. I can certainly pass that along.
Yeah, because I think one of the issues that was raised, which would be more applicable in northern British Columbia, was that New York and Seattle have significant fire departments. And so we have other parts of the province which do not have the same level of quality or coverage. So to have that permission to build a building of that character in a department that doesn't have the response that some others do, maybe like Vancouver or Surrey even do, how they fight fires, how they get apparatus to the property line, how they get access to the building. So there's a number of concerns that were brought forward, not just around the single stair egress issue, which is significant, but also the type of buildings that it enables, the setbacks and so on, that was also of concern. And I think the issue here was that the standard code revision process was not followed, not that this couldn't have been worked out or some other accommodations made or other concerns heard. That consultation is over. The decision was made to implement it a month before the voters have their say. So I think that was also somewhat frustrating. There was no reason why this couldn't have been delayed till November or December, and simultaneously with that, some consultation could have occurred. There could have been some consideration of these concerns. So I think we've seen again how this Ministry of Housing conducts itself versus previous ones, and the standard process in place to make code revisions, I think, is quite serious and wasn't followed here. And the Mayor's Committee made it very clear that it's looking for that process to be undertaken, not the process that was undertaken here. And I believe that's what this motion is asking, for them to reconsider the process, not necessarily that it's not an idea that can be accommodated in some areas where maybe the fire protection and the service response is sufficient for this kind of building to be built. That isn't the case for many fire departments throughout the province of British Columbia. So there were a number of concerns raised. Councillor Bailey, I appreciate the quotes and the references, and I hear your frustration, and it's shared by many of the mayors throughout the region. So with that, I will support it, obviously. And do you have, Councillor Bailey, do you have any concern or desire to see this sent now, or would you like to have, if it's endorsed, I'm assuming it will be, or sent at the conclusion of the election?
Oh, this should be sent now.
You want this sent off right away?
Immediately.
Okay, so that's what the motion is silent on that. So I think Mr. Cooner will get this out the door this week.
Yep, that's
Councillor Van Pop, go ahead.
With the writ drop, though, will it actually go on anybody's desk? Because we've dissolved.
Sooner, I believe it will. It will go on someone's desk. It will be processed and reviewed, and it'll be there for when the minister returns or there's a replacement.
Okay.
Is that fair? Even the nodding? That's the process.
Yes, Your Worship. We will be sending a copy to the Minister, Deputy Minister, the ADM, and the appropriate bureaucratic staff to ensure.
And it will be there along with the letter sent by the Mayor's Committee. I believe that's going to the board and may have already been sent by the chair.
Yeah, one of the reasons I say immediately is because this should be an election issue. And I want to see what people are going to say when they get asked about this, because they are going to be asked. And let's set it up for the future.
Yep. All right. Thank you. So we'll do that. Mr. Cooner, we'll have that out this week. Yeah. All right. So call the question on P8. That carries unanimously. Is there any other business? Councillor Van Popte, go ahead.
Yeah, in today's DL, item 7, Can we address the drive curb that people are parking in front of? We've, had delegations on accessibility today, and this has to do with a walking trail that has no, that has a drive curb, but there's no parking signage there. It's not painted yellow, so people are parking in front of the exit point.
Need a motion for that, Mr. Cooner? I'm sure you can take care of that.
Staff will review that and coordinate.
Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Kunst?
Yeah, I'd like to refer the delegation from Mr. Singh to staff for some recommendations about how we can help with this situation and maybe how other municipalities are dealing with these noise exemptions.
Great. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on that? Great. Call the question on, call that P9. Carries unanimously. Any other thing else, Councillor Kunst? No? Councillor Bailey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to draw attention to item 9 in the distribution list, September 23, and focus on safety yields significant results from the commercial vehicle enforcement. Well done. It is about time that we start, and when you look at what happens, they even have charges because there's no insurance and there's no driver's license. So, well done, staff. Well done, commercial vehicle enforcement. It's about time that we make sure that the commercial vehicles, while they are incredibly important to getting goods to where they're supposed to be, they have to be done safely, because let me tell you from experience, any motor vehicle incident that involves a large commercial vehicle is not a pleasant one.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Councillor Bailey. I also want to pass on those thanks. Mr. Cooner maybe mention that to Manny Nat and Mr. Nat. And I also want to say that this is the benefit of funding additional bylaw enforcement capacity. I know that's been a priority for the public and priority for this council to get this done. And these are the kinds of things that it enables to improve public safety throughout our community. For many years, bylaw enforcement was chronically underfunded for a community of our size, and it's great to geographic size as well. And it's great to see progress, great to see programs like this in place to improve public safety based upon the policy changes that this council has done in coordination with our staff. Great. So with that, any other business? Nope. Anybody wish to add a special closed item? Nope. Get a motion to resolve into special closed. Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Rent. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Get a motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Bailey. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you.